Guarding the last breath. A dog's midnight mission. At precisely 2:46 a.m., the NICU security cameras captured an image no one could believe. A lone German shepherd pacing through sterile corridors as though the hospital belonged to him. Seconds later, baby monitors that had been screaming red all evening cooled to a reassuring green. Upstairs, a motionless firefighter stirred in his coma. Staff stood rooted, torn between protocol and the impossible truth unfolding before them. Who had opened the doors? How did the dog know exactly where to go? As tension mounted, one nurse found a faded photograph. The same dog, years younger, standing proudly beside the comatose man in uniform. That discovery was only the prologue. What came next? Letters of love, medical charts, eclipsed by unexplainable spikes, and a hallway standoff that would decide whether miracles were welcome. Proved that sometimes the bravest guardian wears fur instead of scrubs. Hold on tight. This story doesn't just tug at heartstrings, it plays them like a symphony. The night shift at St. Aurora Hospital ticked in quiet rhythm. At 2:13 a.m., fluorescent lights flickered in near-perfect cadence down sterile hallways, casting a pale glow over vinyl floors scrubbed so often they'd lost their luster. The walls bore no scent, no sound, just the sterile silence of routine. Orderlies pushed carts that squeaked faintly. Monitors beeped their steady, mechanical pulses. Sleep and vigilance blurred together beneath the weight of midnight. Up on the 6th floor, in the neonatal intensive care unit, even the air seemed thinner. Behind tempered glass and beside rows of softly blinking monitors, tiny lives wrestled with a world they hadn't asked to enter. Among them, in Incubator 7, lay baby Finn Reyesborn, 12 weeks early, lungs underdeveloped, skin paper-thin, tethered to tubes that pulsed like lifelines borrowed from machines. Finn's file read like a tragedy, too cruel for a beginning. No mother listed. His father, Nathan Reyes, was lying in a coma 2 floors above, victim of a car crash that shattered half his body and most of his hope. No relatives had shown up. No hand had touched Finn since his birth, except those gloved in latex. He was alone, wrapped in sterile warmth but starved of connection. The NICU nurse on duty, Emily Park, leaned against the counter, with her arms folded tight against her chest. She'd worked this shift for 5 years, but tonight felt heavier somehow. Maybe it was Finn's shallow breaths, their near-invisible flutter against the plastic cradle. Maybe it was the way the ventilator had coughed twice in the last hour, as if stuttering under the weight of waiting too long. He's not going to make it through the night, Dr. Morales had whispered earlier, eyes tired, voice low but decisive. It's kinder to let go. Emily hadn't replied. She couldn't. Not while Finn's chest still rose and fell, even if barely. Not while there was still a heartbeat, however faint. The incubator's monitors told a quiet story of decline. Oxygen saturation hovered in the low 70s. Heart rate was erratic. Cortisol levels were off the charts. A note had already been filed to prepare for the possibility of terminal extubation in the Mornina, cold phrase meaning the tubes would be removed and the baby allowed to pass in peace. But peace wasn't what hung in the room. It was absence. A void. Emily stepped closer to Finn's cradle. Her palm pressed gently to the plastic as if she could transfer something through it: comfort, apology, presence. Her breath fogged the casing for a moment before vanishing again. Hang in there, little guy, she whispered, knowing full well he couldn't hear her. Just a little longer. Somewhere down the hallway, the floor creaked. Not the squeak of rubber soles or the hum of an incoming gurney. It was softer, more measured. A rhythm unfamiliar in a place built around predictability. Emily's brows furrowed. She turned slightly, half expecting to see Dr. Mercer or one of the residents returning from a consult. But the hallway remained empty, lit by a row of buzzing fluorescents that suddenly flickeredens, then twice before steadying again. Probably nothing, she muttered, but something inside her tightened. The clock struck 2:14. In the room beside Finn's, an infant let out a brief cry before settling again. Emily moved to check the vitals, the routine grounding her. She adjusted a sensor, jotted a note, rechecked the oxygen line. Nothing out of place. But her focus drifted again. That sound, the soft creak code once more, closer now. Then, as if scripted in some ancient rhythm, the automatic sliding doors at the far end of the hallway whooshed open. No code alert, no security badge swipe, no overhead announcement. And yet someone or something had entered. Emily stood still. Nurses farther down the hallway peeked around corners. A janitor paused mid-sweep. There was silence for 2 full seconds. Then the sound of claws not sharp, but dulled by agate against the linoleum. Steady, unafraid. And into the fluorescent frame stepped a figure no one expected. A dog. The glass doors at the south wing entrance slid open without a sound, breaking the stillness of the night like a breath held too long. And then he appeared. A German shepherd, large but graying, stepped into the sterile light like a shadow returning to a place it never forgot. His fur, once sable, black and fierce with youth, now bore the soft silver of years muzzled with time, yet undimmed by it. His back bore the subtle arch of old pain, and his right hind leg moved with the slightest hitch. A limp that spoke of past wounds, stitched more with loyalty than sutures. But none of that mattered. Because the moment he crossed the threshold, everything else stopped. The air changed. The buzz of fluorescent lights receded. Even the mechanical beeping from the nearby nurse's station seemed to quiet, as if the building itself had taken notice. Argus, though no one knew his name, yet stood still for a breath, paws planted on the polished floor. His chest rose and fell slowly. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the hallway ahead like a soldier re-entering a battlefield long after the war had ended. His gaze was not wild, not confused. It was focused, deliberate, like he knew exactly where he was going and why. A young security guard named Jordan Morales blinked twice from behind his station desk, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "Where the hell did he come from?" he muttered, nudging his coworker. The older guard, Terry, leaned forward, squinting. "Was there a K-9 scheduled tonight?" "Nope. Nothing in the log." "Is he wearing a vest?" Jordan stepped out from the desk cautiously, eyes narrowing. Number, nothing. But Argus didn't look lost. He looked sent. Nurse Emily Park heard the faint clicking of claws before she saw him. She stepped into the hallway just in time to watch the dog turn left, bypassing the main elevator bay as if he'd walked those halls 100 times. His tail didn't wag. His ears remained half-perkednot alert, but receptive. His steps, though softened by the pads of his worn paws, held a rhythmic finality, like footsteps toward a purpose. Another nurse gasped. "Whose dog is that?" "Probably a therapy dog that got loose," someone offered. But Emily frowned. There was no therapy dog scheduled on night rotation. And even if there were, they never came in alone. She stepped into Argos's path just ahead of the NICU hallway, holding her hand out. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, crouching low. Argos stopped. His eyes met hers. Old eyes, knowing eyes. And in that moment, Emily felt something she couldn't explain, a shiver, not of fear, but recognition. Like the kind you feel when a song you haven't heard in decades plays on the radio, and somehow you still remember every word. She didn't move. Neither did he, until a soft ping echoed from the hallway behind her, a door unlocking near the neonatal wing. Emily turned her head instinctively, momentarily distracted. By the time she looked back, Argos was already walking past her, slow but unyielding, as if drawn by an invisible thread. She could have sworn he glanced toward the nursery window. "Wait, stop him," one of the interns called. But Argos didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He walked like he belonged. And the hospital, in its strange stillness, did not resist him. Terry from security reached for his radio. "We've got an unaccompanied animal in the main NICU corridor," he said, tone measured. "German shepherd. Older, seems calm, but determinate." Upstairs, in a dark corner of the intensive care unit, a monitor flickered. 2 floors down, in room 627, the coma ward, Nathan Reyes's hand twitched. The first movement in 23 days. No one noticed yet. But something had shifted. As Argos neared the NICU door, a senior nurse, Karen Liu, stood in front of him. "Dogs aren't allowed in this section," she said firmly, though her voice held no bite. She wasn't angry, just puzzled. Her eyes dropped to his legs. That's when she noticed. His front left paw, worn and calloused, had a tattoo burned faintly into the skin. K9 317A, a designation. Her eyes flickered with recognition. Wait a second. Is that? But before she could finish, the NICU door beeped. Someone inside had triggered the manual open button. The doors slid apart, and Argos entered, without permission, without hesitation, without sound. Emily followed him in, heart pounding. Inside the NICU, the air felt charged, like the stillness before lightning strikes. The soft beeping of life support systems pulsed steadily. But some monitors glitched briefly as Argos passed, resetting a second later. Nothing alarming, just strange. And then Argos paused at incubator 7. He placed his front paws gently against the glass. Finn's incubator. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood there, breathing slow and deep, nose inches from the fragile child inside. Then came the sound. A low, almost inaudible chuff. Not a bark. Not even a whine. Just a soft, hushed exhale of air through his nose-measured, calm, reverent, like a whisper from an old soul to a new one. And at that exact moment, the monitor attached to Finn's oxygen readout jumped. Oh, 2 levels rose, heart rate steadied, cortisol dropped slightly. Nurse Karen gasped. That's impossible. Emily stepped closer, eyes darting from Argos to the readout. Is it stabilizing? His numbers were tanking 10 minutes ago, Karen whispered. This doesn't just happen. But it was happening, and no one had an explanation. Argos didn't move. He just kept his eyes on the child. Like he knew, like he remembered, like he had waited his whole life to be here at this moment. The hallway was no longer just a hallway. It was a pressure chamber full of silent gasps, shifting feet, and an invisible pull that no one could name but everyone could feel. Argos walked down it slowly, each step soft, deliberate, defiant. The air in the neonatal wing had always been clinical, filtered, measured, scrubbed of chaos. But the moment this aging German shepherd turned the corner toward the NICU, the equilibrium began to break not with violence, but with gravity. Can someone please stop that dog? A doctor's voice pierced the hallway, more shaken than strict. But no one moved. Argos didn't run, didn't stray, didn't flinch. He walked as if the hallway belonged to him. His claws clicked gently against the polished floor, and his fur damp from the summer rain left small paw prints like echoes of some invisible mission. Tension thickened. Nurse Emily, still following him from behind, whispered, "He knows where he's going." Terry, from security, caught up from the other end of the hallway, radio in one hand, doubt in the other. "We can't let this continue," he muttered, mostly to himself. Yet no one moved to intercept the dog, because something held them back. Not fear, not awe. Something to para hesitation that came not from rules, but from instinct. As if every person in that corridor, without saying it, had decided that this one time, the protocol could wait. Argos paused. Only one seat of fork in the hallway, where one sign pointed toward the pediatric ICU and another toward the neonatal intensive care wing. He didn't sniff, didn't look confused. He turned left, straight toward NICU room B. That was when Dr. Levin, the neonatologist on duty, finally stepped in. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, someone grab him!" he snapped, holding out a hand. Argos didn't stop, didn't even look at him. He just kept walking. Calm, steady. Emily stepped in between. "Doctor, wait. Just look. Please, look at him." Levin stared, exasperated. "He's not certified. This is a sterile unit." "I know," she said, her voice softer now. "But he's not panicked. He's not even curious. He's here." The word hung there, too fragile to break. Argos reached the double doors to NICU room B. The access panel flashed red-locked, and then, as if on cue, the doors slid open. Inside, the lights dimmed low for nighttime. Rows of incubators blinked faintly like stars in the dark. And at the far end, incubator 7, Finn. Argos stepped inside, passing 3 nurses and an intern who were too stunned to speak. He walked past incubator 3, paused briefly at incubator 5, then made his way directly to Finn's bedside. Nobody had said his name. Nobody had pointed. But he knew. He stopped, stared, then let out a sound. It wasn't a growl, not a whimper, just one soft bark. A single breath of sound, almost respectful, almost reverent. The room didn't react right away, until the machines did. The pulse oximeter blinked, then reset. The oxygen saturation climbed from 81 to 86. The heart monitor, previously showing mild arrhythmia, suddenly found rhythm. No spikes, no crashes, just stabilization. One of the NICU nurses gasped, hand flying to her mouth. That's not possible. It hasn't been above 83 all day. Another one whispered, "Check the timestamp. Mark it. Mark it." Dr. Levin pushed past them, eyes scanning the screen, then looking back at Argos. "You didn't touch him," he said aloud. "How did you?" Argos didn't turn to him. He just remained still, watching Finn, breathing with him, almost sinking. A soft hush fell over the NICU. Even the babies who'd been fussing earlier were strangely quiet now. And behind them, down the hall, nurses who had followed the incident stood in silent awe. It was as if the hospital had made room for something it didn't know it was missing. A presence that broke every rule, every form, every sense of what should and should not happen in a place governed by charts and vitals and sterile hands. Emily, eyes glassy, stepped beside Argos. "He found him," she whispered. Dr. Levin blinked, still caught between medicine and mystery. "He shouldn't even be in this room." "But he is. And the numbers? They're better." Karen Lou, still holding the printout, looked up. "This is a child we were preparing to let go tomorrow," she said. "But look at him." Everyone did. Finn's small chest was rising more evenly. His limbs twitched, faint but present. His color had improved less blue, more flush. Argos, still unmoving, exhaled softly and sat down beside the incubator. A quiet resignation, not of defeat, but of arrival. As if he'd finally made it where he needed to be. Dr. Levin turned to the staff. "Get NICU protocol revised immediately," he said, voice cracking. "For tonight, make an exception." And no one questioned it. Because tonight, an unregistered, unapproved, and unexplainable German Shepherd had done what medicine could not. He reminded them what presence felt like. The intensive care unit on the 8th floor of St. Anthony's Hospital had fallen into its usual nocturnal rhythm. Low murmurs from nurses on shift change, the steady hiss of oxygen tanks, monitors blinking in quiet defiance of sleep. Room 814 had been quiet for weeks. The patient inside Nathan Reyes, 33, former firefighter, husband, father of a son he'd never been allowed to hold lay tethered to silence. He'd been comatose since the accident on I-94, his body flung into a barrier in a failed effort to swerve from an oncoming drunk driver. The impact fractured his skull. Doctors told the family, "No brain activity, we'll keep monitoring, but prepare." 23 days, no movement, no words, only the beep, beep, beep of borrowed time. And then at 3:14 a.m., something shifted. Not a siren, not a monitor, but a finger. A single, nearly imperceptible twitch of the left index finger, resting beneath the loose hospital sheet. Nurse Marin Lynn, in her first year out of nursing school, almost missed it. She'd been adjusting the saline line when the movement caught the corner of her eye. Subtle enough to dismiss, gentle enough to question. She blinked, waited. Nothing. But then again, this time clearer. The finger curled, just slightly, like it remembered it used to hold things, like it still wanted to. Marin's breath caught. Her clipboard almost slipped from her hand. "Mr. Reyes," she whispered, not expecting a response, but saying it anyway. Because, in a place like this, hope always whispered first. She leaned closer, unsure if what she'd seen was a spasm or a sign. Then she heard it. Faint, fragile, like breath torn in half. "Finn." The name trembled from Nathan's cracked lips, almost not a word. More a vibration threaded with memory. Marin froze. The name was clear. It wasn't a groan, not a reflex. It was intentional, like a man reaching from underwater, grabbing one thread of light. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing out of the room, nearly tripping over her own shoes. "Dr. Myers, room 814, he moved. He said something." The on-call physician Dr. Rachel Myers had heard this kind of claim before. False hope was common in the ICU. But something about Marin's voice made her move faster than usual. They entered the room together. Nathan lay still, but his brow was furrowed, ever so slightly, like someone fighting through thick fog. Dr. Myers stepped forward. "Nathan," she said gently, "it's Rachel. If you can hear me, move your hand." Seconds passed. Beep, beep, beep. And then movement. Not a full grasp, but a tremble in all 5 fingers this time. His head twitched minutely to the side, toward the sound. "Call neurology," Dr. Myers said, eyes wide now. "And respiratory. We might be reducing sedation. Help." Marin, still clutching the clipboard like a lifeline, added, "He said the name Finn." Dr. Myers paused. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Clear as day." Rachel looked at the chart. "His son, premature, NICU, room B downstairs." There was no scientific reason for a man 3 floors up, under monitored sedation, to know what was happening below. He hadn't opened his eyes in 3 weeks. No visitors since the accident. No voices in the room except staff. But he said it. He said his name. Downstairs, the monitors around baby Finn continued to improve. Upstairs, Nathan Reyes, previously silent, had remembered he had someone to come back to. In the hallway outside room 814, Marin leaned against the wall, her chest still rising fast. The night shift was usually quiet, predictable in its weight, but not tonight. Not with a whisper turning into a name. Not with a finger curling like it wanted to hold its son. "Are you okay?" another nurse asked. Marin nodded slowly, still dazed. I think something's happening here tonight, and it doesn't make sense." The nurse smiled gently. Miracles rarely do. The buzz in the NICU wasn't just about the monitors anymore. It had started with a bark, one soft, almost reverent sound, a noise that shouldn't have belonged in a place like this but somehow did, like it was always meant to happen. Nurses huddled behind the glass partition, whispering in tones just above a hush, eyes flicking between baby Finn's vitals and the surveillance footage being rewound at Nurse Emily's station. "Run it back again," one said, leaning in. The grainy footage showed it clearly. The old German shepherd walking past the security desk, unhindered. No handler, no leash, no badge, just intent. He didn't sniff, didn't wander, just walked like a soldier on assignment straight down the east corridor and turned left toward the NICU like he'd memorized the floor plan. "Right here," Emily whispered, slowing the tape. He pauses, then barks once. And right after that, she rewound the baby's monitor footage to the same timestamp. 2, 40 delapan AM, Finn's O2 saturation jumps. 2, 46 13 A, Monsieur heart rate stabilizes. 2 hours, 46 minutes, and 20 seconds AM, respiration pattern levels out. None of it made sense. He didn't touch anything. He barely made a sound, another nurse muttered. And yet, Emily's eyes were glued to the screen, fingers curled under her chin. A strange heaviness pressed against her chest, not fear, not awe, something in between, a presence. Upstairs, the neurological team was still processing Nathan Reyes' awakening. Downstairs, whispers were rising fast, passed like static between staff. And now, threads were being drawn. "Wait," Emily said, her brow furrowing. "That name Argos." Someone said it earlier. She clicked back into the hospital log system, typing slowly. She scrolled past hundreds of entries, ER admits, discharges, code blues. Then she paused. 3 years ago. A different wing, different crisis. Canine officer. Argos, retired, medically discharged. Traumatic stress, handler deceased. Emily didn't know why her heart skipped a beat. She whispered, almost involuntarily, "Argos." The name wasn't just familiar, it meant something. But the memory refused to surface, like a photo turned face down in her mind. Elsewhere in the building, in the administration wing, the knock on the door was firm, urgent, but not panicked. Dr. Lena Mercer, the medical director of St. Anthony's, looked up from a budget spreadsheet, eyes tired behind her glasses. "Yes?" A resident stepped in, face pale. "You need to come downstairs, to the NICU," she frowned. "Something wrong with the Reyes baby? That's just it. Something's changed. And it might be tied to a dog?" Mercer removed her glasses.
A what?
He walked in on his own. No handler, no ID. Security has no record of entry. But the moment he reached the NICU, the baby's vitals turned around. We have it all on video. Dr. Mercer stood. What kind of dog? German Shepherd. Older. Looks retired. But ma'am, it wasn't just the baby. The resident hesitated. Go on. The father Nathan Reyes in room 814. He's awake. He said his son's name, right around the same time. That made Mercer pause. Both? Same window of time? He nodded. Mercer didn't speak for a moment. Then, pull the footage. I want timestamps, full logs, and I want to see this dog. Back in the NICU, Argos was gone. Not missing, just no longer there. Like his part was done. Or maybe it wasn't. No one had seen him leave, just like no one saw him enter. But the scent lingered faintly. That earthy, warm smell of a dog who had spent too long in the cold. Emily walked down the hallway toward the east stairwell, not even sure what she was looking for. The floor was quiet now, humming only with the usual night sounds. She paused near the stairwell door, hand resting on the frame. That's when it came back. The memory. 3 years ago, she'd been a student, shadowing in the ER. There was a Code Red officer down. A K-9 had been injured pulling a child out of a burning apartment. The handler died at the scene. The dog survived. Barely. She remembered the moment the stretcher wheeled past. The bloodied muzzle, the burned pads, the eyes haunted, searching. And the name on the kennel tag. Argos. Her breath hitched. It was the same dog. Older now. Grayer around the snout. Slower, maybe. But those eyes, they were unmistakable. Emily pressed her hand to her chest. You came back, she whispered. Why now? In the administration room, Mercer stared at the footage. She said nothing for a long time. Just watched the dog enter frame. Walk past the front desk. Stop at the NICU door. Sit. One bark. One miracle. Then she whispered as if to herself, I don't know who let you in, Argos. But if this is what it looks like, we might be standing in something bigger than medicine. The NICU smelled of antiseptic and low anxiety, a sterile orchestra of beeps, filtered air, and hushed prayers. But this morning, it was something else, something beneath the surface. Not a scent, not a sound, a presence. Emily stood silently beside Finn's incubator, one hand lightly resting on the plexiglass dome. The newborn's chest rose and fell with newfound rhythm, his pulse soft but steady on the monitor beside him. It was the kind of progress that usually took days, not minutes. But no one was celebrating. Not yet. Instead, just outside the NICU, a cluster of white coats gathered like a storm cloud waiting to erupt. It's a biohazard, one of the infection control nurses snapped, flipping through printed protocols. We're in a sterile ward. That dog should have never been let in. He wasn't let in, someone else countered. He found his way here. And did you see what happened to the baby? Coincidence, a younger doctor said flatly. Correlation isn't causation. A more senior nurse folded her arms. Call it what you want, but that child was dying before that dog stepped in. Now he's stable. You want to rewrite protocol based on an anecdote? The younger doctor challenged. What next? Bring in therapy cats during cardiac arrests? No one laughed, because no one really knew what they were looking at anymore. Inside the NICU, Emily didn't move. She kept her eyes on Finn, watching the subtle twitch of his fingers, the way his tiny mouth moved like it was dreaming. Her mind was flooded with images, the dog's calm gaze, his careful walk, the singular bark. It hadn't felt random. It had felt guided. She looked over her shoulder toward the hallway, half expecting to see Argos again. But he was gone. Just like before. No fanfare, no leash, no goodbye. But she felt him, like a trace of warmth in a room that should have been cold. And deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Back in the conference room, Dr. Lena Mercer joined the heated discussion. The footage had already circulated among department heads. Opinions had taken root like weeds. It's a violation, said the head of infectious disease. Animals in sterile zones, especially with compromised infant Sopin's liability beyond control. Agreed, said a pediatrician. If that dog had triggered an immune response or damaged equipment, we'd be having a different conversation. Dr. Mercer held up a hand. But he didn't. They paused. He didn't touch the child, didn't contaminate anything. But what he did do, she chose her words carefully, was change something. She looked around the room. I'm not saying we throw away science. I'm saying observe, document, don't dismiss. Silence followed. No one wanted to be the one to say it aloud, that a miracle might have walked in on 4 legs last night. Downstairs, Emily crouched beside Finn's bed. He said your name, you know, she whispered, glancing toward the ceiling. Nathan Reyes, she murmured. Your father. She didn't know why she was talking out loud. Maybe to break the silence, or maybe because it no longer felt like she was alone in the room. Not really. She looked at Finn again. I don't know what's happening, little guy, but something in me says not to be afraid. She reached over and adjusted his tiny cap, tucking a loose strand of hair under the soft cotton. And then she heard the footsteps. Slow, unhurried, familiar. She stood. Argos. He had returned. No one had seen him enter. No alert from security. No bark. He just appeared in the threshold like a shadow drawn by heartbeat. Hey, Emily said softly. He didn't approach the incubator this time. Instead, he sat, right beside her, like a sentinel. An hour later, a cleaning crew entered with gloves and disinfectants, alerted by upper management's concern. One of the nurses balked. You're not seriously going to remove him, are you? We were told to follow sanitation protocol. Dog or not, the lead replied. But he's not hurting anyone, and he's not registered with therapy clearance or the police unit. So technically, he shouldn't be here. The staff hesitated. Even now, with his aging coat, scuffed paws, and tired joints, Argos exuded calm. He didn't bark, didn't resist. He just watched like he understood more than he should. When one of the staff reached toward him gently, intending to lead him away, Emily stepped forward. I'll stay with him, she said. And with Finn. Please. There was something in her voice. Not defiance, but conviction. The kind that didn't come from textbooks or protocols. The team looked to each other, then slowly stepped back. Argos remained seated. Emily sat beside him, back against the wall, a nurse's badge still clipped to her coat, stethoscope dangling loose like forgotten armor. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She trusted this dog, even if no one else did yet. Emily moved down the hallway, her steps slow, mind trailing far behind her body. She wasn't sure what drew her out of the NICU. Maybe it was the need for breath, or maybe the pressure in the air had grown too dense. She had stayed by Finn's side for hours, watching Argos sit guard like a marble lion, a creature carved out of time. Now, the silence of the hospital corridor offered no comfort, just questions. She paused at the vending machine near the waiting lounge. The coffee was cold. The lights overhead flickered with that telltale buzz hospitals never fixed. Then her eyes caught something framed beside the elevators. A photo, the kind people rarely notice anymore. Mounted in a dusty wood frame, its edges sun-faded, hanging slightly crooked on the wall. It blended in beige on beige with the color of exhaustion. But what pulled her in was not the plaque. It was the eyes. One man, one dog, frozen in time. Officer Nathan Reyes and K9 Argos. Read the small engraving beneath the photo. It hit her like static electricity, a jolt through the chest, impossible to explain. Her eyes scanned the image. A man in uniform, lean and calm, crouched beside a sturdy German shepherd. Their bodies turned forward, but their gazes aligned, locked together like iron forged under fire. Reyes had a quiet intensity, but it was the dog who startled her. That was him, no doubt. Samachase, Sama-worn brow. Same dignity and posture, as if standing before danger or standing between it and someone he loved. Argos. She took a step closer. Her reflection hovered in the plexiglass frame like a ghost. Beside the photo was a yellowed newspaper clipping, laminated years ago and now curling slightly at the corners. Local heroes save missing toddler in flood zone. The headline was bold, dramatic, but it was the black and white image that stole her breath. A swollen creek, a crumpled stroller, paramedics surrounding a small child wrapped in a silver blanket. And there, muddy and soaked to the bone, Argos, muzzle wet, ribs heaving, eyes laser-focused on the medic's hands. Standing behind him, gripping the leash with trembling fingers, was Reyes. The article was dated 7 years ago. Emily's fingers brushed the glass. "He's been here before," she whispered to no one. The air shifted. The rain came down in violent sheets. Sirens wailed through the valley as volunteers scrambled along the embankment of Arroyo Creek. The current had broken its banks, sweeping away anything in its path. Among the missing, a 2-year-old boy last seen near a flooded playground. Nathan Reyes, still young then, gritted his jaw as he scanned the water. "Argos, seek!" The dog didn't hesitate. Mud sucked at his paws as he launched into the underbrush, eyes narrowed, nose low to the ground. Time became irrelevant. Only scent mattered now. Argos darted left, paused, then turned sharply. A bark one, sharp and urgent. Reyes ran. And there, wedged against the roots of a half-fallen tree, half submerged in water, was the child, his lips blue, body limp. Argos stood in the river, nudging the boy's chest with his nose, whining low and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Reyes splashed into the current, hauling the child into his arms. The boy gasped. The world exhaled. And from that day on, people didn't just respect Canine Argos. They believed in him. Emily blinked back the images like clearing fog from a windshield. 7 years ago, she murmured. She did the math. Finn's age, Nathan's coma. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Suddenly, things snapped into place with the quiet precision of a puzzle piece you didn't know you were missing. Reyes wasn't just Finn's father. He was a rescuer, a protector. And Argos, he wasn't just any dog. He was part of that legacy. Maybe that's why he returned. Maybe he had always been watching, waiting, for a reason to come back. Behind her, the elevator chimed. A gurney rolled past. A nurse chatted softly into her shoulder mic. Life continued in its normal, forgettable rhythm. But Emily no longer felt like she was part of it. She was between pages now, between memories and moments that still hadn't revealed their endings. She looked at the photo one last time. "Come on, Argos," she whispered, then turned back toward the NICU, toward Finn, toward the boy with the steady breath and the warrior waiting at his side. Some stories, she realized, don't begin with a birth. They begin with a return. Emily stood still for a moment longer, her hand resting lightly on the glass frame in the hallway. The faces from the photograph, Nathan Reyes, and the dog now lying at her feet, floated like echoes of something long buried. There was something sacred in that image, something resolute, a bond that hadn't needed explanation then, and apparently still didn't now. She turned from the photo, a quiet urgency in her steps. The air in the NICU was hushed, tense but not hostile. Nurses moved carefully, glancing at Argos now and then, unsure whether to treat him like a patient, a trespasser, or something else entirely. No one had dared to remove him, and no one could quite explain why. Argos had not moved an inch since he first planted himself beside baby Finn's incubator. His eyes stayed half-lidded, but not closed. Always watching. His breathing was slow, measured, present, like a sentinel that refused to leave its post. Emily approached with a gentle crouch. The latex gloves she wore made the touch colder than she wanted, but she rested her hand lightly near his paw. The old dog's ears flicked slightly. Not startled, just acknowledging. She leaned in, just enough so only he could hear. "You found him, didn't you?" she whispered. There was no wag, no whine, but his breathing hitched ever so slightly. It was enough. She felt it. That invisible thread stretched across years. Loss, silence, and memory had not broken. It had merely gone still. Waiting. A lump formed in her throat. "You came back," she added, almost inaudibly, "even when no one else did." The room wasn't completely quiet, but time seemed to slow. One of the monitors gave a soft, rhythmic beep. Finn's oxygen saturation, stable again. His little chest rose with a steadiness that defied the medical chart predictions from earlier that day. A shift. Subtle, but real. The other nurses began to take notice not just of the numbers, but of the atmosphere. Kara, the NICU head nurse, walked in from the adjoining hallway. Her eyes landed on Argos first. The crease between her eyebrows deepened. "We can't have animals in here," she began, her voice firm but not unkind. "This is a sterile space." "I know," Emily interrupted gently, standing up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. But I think he's the reason that baby is still here. Kara blinked, lips parting as if to protest, but her eyes wandered to the monitors, then to Finn's incubator, then back to Argos, whose stillness had become a kind of gravity in the room. I ran a temp scan 5 minutes ago, said one of the nurses nearby. Finn was dipping again, but after the dog barked, it just corrected. No meds administered yet. No changes in oxygen. Kara hesitated. The silence in the room had weight now. Emily continued, her voice quieter. He's not just any dog. That's Argos, Nathan Reyes' canine partner, from the Metro PD. There was a pause. Dr. Lena Mercer had just stepped in behind them, having heard the last sentence. Her clipboard was pressed to her chest. She hadn't seen Argos up close yet, only heard whispers through the hospital grapevine about a mystery dog somehow slipping past the ER doors and bypassing security. Her gaze drifted to the dog now, and she paused. For a long moment, this wasn't a mutt someone wandered in with. There was an air about him, an intelligence in his stillness, the kind that made you instinctively lower your voice when near, the way people did at war memorials or in church. Argos did not look at her, but his presence demanded recognition nonetheless. I thought Reyes was still in a coma, Lena murmured. He is, Emily said. But he spoke. Just a word. A name. Right after this dog barked beside Finn. Whose name? Finn's. Silence. Again. Lena glanced between the incubator, the nurses, and Argos. Her clinical instincts warred with something else, something older, more human. She'd spent her life trusting science, data, trials, protocols, but none of that could explain the pulse she felt just now standing in that room. Something was happening here. It may not have belonged in a journal article or white paper, but it was real. Kara folded her arms. Are we really going to let a dog stay in a NICU because of a few coincidences and a bark? Emily didn't flinch. Coincidences don't bark names. Coincidences don't travel miles barefoot, bleeding, and find a baby in a sealed hospital. This is something else. Lena took a breath. Then, a long exhale. Finally, she spoke. Let him stay. Just for now. Gasps rippled softly. Kara looked shocked, but didn't protest. We'll keep him contained, Lena added quickly. 1 visitor per room. Emily, you monitor both Finn and the dog. No contact with any other patient. Emily nodded. Relief washed over her like light cracking through a storm cloud. She turned back to Argos, whose eyes met hers for just a moment. A silent thank you. A contract understood. I'll stay, she promised. And with that, the NICU, sterile, rigid, clinical, became something more. A space where rules bent quietly for something wordless, but powerful. Where science met instinct. Where a dog's silent vigil began to turn hearts. Not through barking or tricks or movement, but simply by staying. The break room was dimly lit, insulated from the fluorescent bustle of the NICU. A soft hum of the vending machine was the only sound, aside from the occasional distant overhead page. Emily sat at the counter, a cardboard box resting on her lap, Nathan Reyes' personal effects. The box had been sealed, forgotten in the back corner of the hospital's storage room labeled Next of Kin, Reyes, Nor. Until today, no one had dared hope he'd need them again. She stared at the tape securing the flaps, her fingers hesitating before pulling at the brittle seal. There was something sacred about it. A line drawn between the living and the nearly lost. But now, with Nathan twitching fingers and whispering names, that line was blurring. She peeled it open. Inside, a worn leather wallet, a set of keys on a chain with the Chicago PD insignia, a folded flannel shirt that still held the faintest scent of pine and cologne, and a crumpled parking ticket from a year ago, and beneath it all, a single envelope. It was thick, weathered at the corners, sealed in wax that had cracked in places. Written on the front, in a hand so steady it nearly hurt to see, "If I don't make it, let Argos protect my son." Emily's breath hitched. Her fingers hovered over the flap. She didn't dare open it. Not yet. Instead, she clutched it to her chest as if the paper held a heartbeat. She sat there for a long moment, letting the gravity of those words settle. The letter was more than just ink and parchment. It was a map, a last will, A tether between a man half lost in coma and the newborn he hadn't yet held. And in the center of it all, Argos. The dog hadn't moved in hours. He lay curled beneath the incubator, as if he belonged there. No leash, no command, just presence. Watching, guarding. She stood, envelope in hand, and made her way down the quiet hallway toward Dr. Mercer's office. Dr. Lena Mercer was on her third espresso and fifth hour without blinking when the knock came. She looked up, the tired lines around her eyes deepening. Emily entered, hands clasped like someone who had just found a ticking bomb wrapped in velvet. "Lena," she said quietly, "I think you should see this." She placed the envelope on the desk with a reverence that made Mercer pause mid-sentence. The director looked at it for a beat, then adjusted her glasses. "Where did this come from?" "Nathan's personal effects," Emily said. "It was buried in the back room. I was looking for any emergency contacts, but then I saw this. I haven't opened it." Dr. Mercer's eyes flicked over the words on the envelope. When she read Argos's name, something subtle shifted in her expression, the smallest crack in her clinical armor. Emily leaned in. "We all felt it, didn't we? When he barked, when the monitors changed. And now, Nathan's showing signs. This isn't a coincidence." Dr. Mercer remained silent for a moment. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, she picked up the envelope, broke the seal. Inside, a single page, handwritten. No formal greeting, just raw, honest words. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home the way I planned. My name is Nathan Reyes. I was K-9 unit for 12 years. Argos wasn't just my partner, he's family. He's been trained in more ways than most people could imagine. But what matters most, he has instincts. Not just for danger, for life, for healing. My son's name is Finn. He wasn't supposed to be born this early. If I'm not there, and Argos finds his way to him, let him stay. Don't try to understand it, just trust it. Dogs like Argos, they don't forget their people. And I trust him with mine." "Nathan," Dr. Mercer finished reading. Her eyes didn't well up, but the hand, holding the page, trembled slightly. She set it down on the desk like it was made of glass. Emily said nothing, allowing the silence to speak louder than any argument could. For the first time, Lena Mercer wasn't thinking like a hospital administrator. Not a scientist, not a gatekeeper of policy. She was thinking like a woman who understood the weight of absence. The ache of, if I don't make it. "Oh." She leaned back in her chair, staring past the envelope, past Emily, as if she were trying to see the edges of something too vast to name. "You believe he saved the baby?" she asked, voice low. Emily nodded. "I think he's still saving him." A long breath. Then Lena folded the letter, carefully, and returned it to its envelope. "I need to speak with the board, but for now," she looked up, her voice softening. "Argos stays." Down the hall, Argos lifted his head. His ears flicked toward the sound of muffled conversation, but he didn't move from his place beneath Finn's incubator. The baby's heart monitor beat a soft rhythm overhead, steady, strong. Outside the NICU window, snow began to fall. And in that moment, a quiet understanding passed through the hospital walls like a message from a world older than science, deeper than medicine. Some bonds aren't taught, they're born. The sharp echo of dress shoes on tile broke the fragile calm of the neonatal wing. Winston Matthews, hospital director, always pressed, polished, and punctual, strode down the corridor like a man whose authority arrived 5 seconds before he did. A clipboard thudded against his side, though he hadn't read it. He didn't need to. He'd already heard the nonsense from 2 departments. "A dog," he muttered under his breath. "In my NICU, M." He pushed through the double doors with the kind of force reserved for people who didn't knock. The room went still. Machines hummed. Oxygen hissed softly. Nurses glanced up from incubators. And near the end of the unit, right next to the smallest isolette, sat Argos. Still. "Regal. Present." Matthew's eyes narrowed. "You have to be kidding me." Dr. Lena Mercer turned from Finn's incubator, clipboard in hand, her voice low. "Director Matthews, I didn't realize you were visiting the floor today." He gestured with both hands, exasperated. "I shouldn't have to. You let a stray know, a police dog, unvetted, uncleaned into a sterile ward designed for preemies? Have we lost our collective minds? Nurse Emily stiffened, stepping forward instinctively. He's not just a dog. Matthews rounded on her. Miss Emily Kwan, NICU rotation. I don't care if you're Florence Nightingale reincarnated. This is a violation of hospital protocol, infection control, insurance policy, and basic sense. Argos didn't move. He didn't flinch or blink. His ears were perked, eyes alert, breathing steady. If he noticed the uproar about him, he didn't show it. He remained beside baby Finn's isolette, like a sentinel carved from patience. Mercer folded her arms. The infant's vitals began stabilizing the moment Argos arrived. And I'm sure if a hummingbird flapped its wings in Tokyo, we'd credit that too, Matthews snapped. She didn't rise to the bait. We've checked air quality, surface levels, no contaminants, and no signs of distress from any other child. Matthews was already pulling his phone from his pocket. You'll forgive me if I don't take pseudoscience and anecdote as reason to violate state health codes. And I'll forgive you, Mercer said, if you take 10 seconds to observe what's happening before you make a decision that could break something none of us can explain yet. He gestured toward Argos, who now shifted slightly to rest his head on his paws, calm but watchful. This is a medical institution, Matthews said flatly. Not a barn, not a shrine, not a fairy tale. Emily stepped closer again. Sir, with respect, that dog is here for a reason. Oh, I'm sure he is. Maybe next we'll let an alpaca in the trauma bay, because someone dreamed it was a spirit guide. Dr. Mercer reached into her coat and pulled something from her pocket. She didn't wave it around. She simply offered it to Matthews, a sealed envelope, worn from handling. He eyed it skeptically. What's this? Nathan Reyes' last instructions, found among his personal effects. Matthews glanced at the writing on the front. Handwritten. Faded. If I don't make it, let Argos protect my son. N. His expression didn't soften. Not immediately. But some splinter of discomfort cracked the surface. Reyes, he muttered. The officer? The one in the coma upstairs? Yes, Emily said. He's Finn's father. Matthews blinked. Once. Then again. He has no next of kin listed. No one knew about the child, Mercer said. But Argos did. He showed up at the hospital by himself. We believe he found his way across the city, maybe by scent, maybe memory, but he came straight here. And you think that's enough? Matthews scoffed. You want me to overturn a decade of biohazard policies because a dog made a dramatic entrance? We're not asking you to declare him a saint, Mercer replied evenly. But maybe, just maybe, you don't interfere with something that's working. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick with breath and beep, and the thrum of life too fragile to speak for itself. Matthews looked around. The staff were watching him, not defiant, just tired, hopeful. Desperate in that way people get when they've run out of logic and begun leaning on instinct. He turned to Argos. The dog didn't rise, didn't bark, just lifted his eyes and met Matthews with a gaze that wasn't aggressive, wasn't submissive, just steady. Like he was reading the man's soul and waiting to see if there was anything worth trusting. Even if I let him stay, Matthews said finally. One complaint, one incidente's gone. Understood, Mercer said. But I want this logged, he added. Formally, every shift, his presence, his behavior, and your responsibility, Dr. Mercer. If something goes wrong, it won't. He didn't like the certainty in her voice, but he said nothing more. Matthews adjusted his collar, tapped his phone screen, and turned to leave. Before he reached the doors, Emily called after him. Sir? He paused without turning. You asked who Argos was. Silence. He's the dog who pulled a 3-year-old from a house fire in South District back in 2017. He's the one who wouldn't leave the body of a fallen partner in a warehouse shooting until search and rescue arrived. He's not just a dog. He's family. And this might be the last thing he knows how to do. Matthews didn't reply. He walked out, shoes tapping like punctuation marks on the floor. The doors sighed shut behind him. And in his silence, something had shifted. The fluorescent lights above cast a cold sheen on the linoleum floor. But Emily's hands were burning. She could feel her pulse in her throat as she stood in front of Winston Matthews, the hospital director whose mere presence turned rooms into silent courtrooms. Around them, The hallway buzzed with hushed voices and restrained stares. Argos, ever still, sat behind her like a statue carved from loyalty itself. Matthew's voice was sharp. "This is not a kennel. This is a sterile neonatal unit. That dog leaves. Now." Emily's knuckles tightened around the envelope. "He's not just a dog," she said, her voice wavering but not breaking. Matthews took a step forward. "Miss Carter, this isn't a debate. I don't know how he got in or why protocol was ignored, but I won't tolerate this circus any longer." All eyes turned to Emily. She felt them like heat on her back. Nurses, techs, even 2 residents with clipboards paused at the end of the hallway. The weight of the moment pressed down like gravity had tripled, but she didn't back away. With a trembling breath, Emily opened the envelope she'd found in Nathan Reyes' personal effects. The paper inside was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded. But the handwriting was steady, deliberate. She cleared her throat. "If I don't make it," she began, voice low at first, then steadier with each word, "let Argos protect my son." A ripple ran through the hall. Even Matthew's face flickered a blink, a stiffening of the jaw. Emily continued, now louder. "His name is Finn. I wasn't supposed to have him. I was told the odds were impossible, that I might lose both of us. I made peace with it. But if I didn't make it, I asked just one thing: let Argos find him. Let him protect what's left of me." Silence. Argos, as if summoned by the very memory of the man who wrote those words, stood up slowly and moved to Emily's side. His amber eyes scanned the room, then settled on Matthews. The medical director, Lena Mercer, stepped forward. Her expression was conflicted, the lines on her forehead etched deep from years of hard decisions, but something inside her had shifted. "Winston," she said softly, "you weren't here when it happened." "When what happened?" he snapped. "The baby Finn," Mercer said, gesturing gently toward the NICU behind them. "His vitals were crashing. Nothing we did stabilized him. But when Argos walked in, he didn't bark, didn't touch a thing, just sat by the incubator, and Finn's heart rhythm leveled. Respiration followed. Every metric improved. Call it coincidence. But I was there. I saw it." Matthews looked from Mercer to Emily, then to the nurses, now forming a quiet semicircle behind them. "I'm not saying we let emotions override medicine," Mercer added. "But if there's even a chance this animal is somehow helping, even if it's psychological, do we really want to risk removing him right now?" One of the NICU nurses stepped forward, Joanna, the older one, with silver streaks in her bun. Her voice cracked from years of calling codes and whispering lullabies to struggling newborns. "I've worked in this unit for 26 years, she said, "and I've never seen anything like that. That dog didn't just sit there. It was like he knew that child." Matthew's expression flickered again, his shoulders rigid but not advancing. "This isn't how we run a hospital. We don't operate on gut feelings and miracles. We have protocols, sanitation policies." "Sir," Emily said, her voice now steady, "sometimes the heart knows before the science catches up. That letter, it's not just a wish. It's a last directive from a father who knew he might not come home. And somehow, Argos, his partner, made it here. We don't even know how, but he did." Argos gave the faintest huff, as if punctuating her words. Matthews looked at the floor, then back up. "So, what do you propose? That we allow a German Shepherd to roam the NICU indefinitely?" Emily didn't hesitate. "We take precautions. He stays in the corner near Finn. We limit access, sanitize his paws, post an attendant, I'll volunteer. But we give him a chance, just like we gave Finn one." Matthews let out a breath through his nose, sharp and reluctant. His eyes lingered on Argos, then on the letter still trembling in Emily's hand. "If anything happens, any incident, it's on you," he muttered. "Temporary, 48 hours. And I want a full behavioral and medical clearance." Before Emily could respond, Dr. Mercer nodded. "That's reasonable. I'll sign off." A quiet exhale moved through the crowd. Not relief, not yet, but a soft loosening. The kind that comes after holding something too tight for too long. Emily knelt, placing her hand on Argos' back. "You're staying, big guy," she whispered, more to herself than him. And though no one said it aloud, something had changed in the air. In a sterile hospital built on order and rationality, one dog, one letter, and one woman's belief had bent the rules not for chaos, but for something ancient and sacred. A promise kept, a loyalty remembered, and a life, perhaps, saved. The hallway had never been so quiet. After the confrontation, Winston Matthews stood like a statue in the center of the neonatal ICU corridor. His jaw clenched, fingers twitching with corporate frustration, yet something in his eyes, the briefest flicker, betrayed uncertainty. The letter still lay in his hand, slightly trembling. Behind him, Argos remained motionless, ears forward, breath calm, as if awaiting the verdict of a court only he could understand. Emily stood barely a foot away, her back straight despite the adrenaline still surging through her. She had surprised even herself, she, the quiet night shift nurse who never liked conflict. But this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about a promise, about a boy, about something sacred that no manual or rule book could fully name. Dr. Mercer broke the silence first. Her voice, usually so composed, was softer now. Winston, we've had anomalies before. Babies turning corners for no reason. But this, two lives stabilizing in correlation with one presence? We're scientists, yes, but we're also witnesses. Matthews exhaled heavily. A hospital isn't a barn, Lena. No, it isn't. But neither is it a fortress, she said quietly. And sometimes rarely something beyond protocol steps in. Emily dared to speak again. He's not just a dog. He's Finn's guardian. You saw the letter. Matthews's fingers folded the paper tighter, the crinkle sharp in the silence. His gaze darted between Argos, the incubator, and the barely perceptible rise and fall of the premature infant's chest. The monitors beside Finn flickered steady oxygen saturation holding, heart rate rhythmic, as if calmed by some unseen lullaby. I want daily labs, full infection control measures, Matthews muttered. One bark, one mess, one drop in sanitation. Score, he's gone. Dr. Mercer nodded solemnly. Understood. And only 24 hours. This is not a precedent. He handed the letter back to Emily as if it were burning in his hands. We'll reevaluate tomorrow. Emily whispered, Thank you. It wasn't victory, it was reprieve. But sometimes that was enough. Matthews left without another word, his polished shoes echoing down the sterile hallway. Only when the doors closed behind him did the nurses and staff finally breathe. Argos didn't move. He simply turned, padded soundlessly back to his post beside the incubator, and lay down. Like a statue carved of muscle and loyalty, he settled at Finn's side, not guarding, not waiting, just being. Emily knelt again, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. He's still fighting, she murmured. And you knew. You always knew. The lights in the NICU dimmed slightly as night took its grip outside. The atmosphere turned quiet again, not clinical, not tense, but reverent, as if the very walls were watching now. A few feet away, Dr. Mercer stood beside the vitals monitor. She hadn't said much since Matthews left, but her eyes hadn't left the screen. The numbers were undeniable. Finn's oxygen requirement had dropped again, not by a fraction, but by nearly 15%. His heart rate, once spiking intermittently, now paced evenly. The nurse charting beside her leaned in. Is that real? She whispered. Mercer nodded slowly. It shouldn't be, but it is. Even Finn's color seemed subtly different, less translucent, a blush warming across his tiny cheeks. The infant's fingers twitched slightly, as if sensing the presence beside him, as if the warmth of that old German shepherd had wrapped around him like something remembered. One of the respiratory techs crossed herself quietly. That dog, she whispered. He's doing something. I don't care what anyone says. In the observation room, where parents often watch their newborns behind glass, two couples stood in silence. No one said the word miracle, but it hung in the air like static. Something was happening here, something that defied easy categorization. Emily walked over to the window and pulled the blinds halfway down, not to block out the world, but to dim the scrutiny. This was sacred now, not a science experiment, not a policy loophole, just a room where something good was trying to happen. She returned to her station, but her eyes never left Argos. He hadn't budged. His gaze was steady, not on Finn, but on something beyond some fixed point only he could see, some ancient instinct pulling at him, reminding him that he wasn't done yet, that Nathan Reyes wasn't done yet, that this child still had more to breathe. Dr. Mercer approached Emily, arms folded across her lab coat. "That letter changes everything," she said. Emily nodded. "It's not just that he showed up. It's that he knew. He found him. Reyes and Argos." "I remember now," Mercer said quietly. "They saved that girl during the flood 2 counties over. She was trapped in a culvert. End of..." "Finn's name wasn't even in the system," Emily whispered. "How did Argos find him? How did he..." Mercer looked over at the dog again. "There are things science can't quantify. Connection, memory, purpose." Emily swallowed hard. "You think they still have it? That bond?" Mercer exhaled. "If that dog's anything like what I saw in that photo, then yes, it never left." Minutes passed in silence. Then, as if on cue, the monitor beeped softly, not in warning, but in confirmation. Finn's oxygen need had dropped again, almost imperceptible, but there. The attending on call leaned over the screen, eyes wide. "Respiration rate just normalized," he said aloud. In the corner, Argos shifted slightly, one ear twitching. Still silent, still steadfast. Emily closed her chart slowly, heart catching in her chest. "We only have 24 hours, she whispered. Dr. Mercer replied, her voice quiet and full of something rare. "Hope. Then let's make every second count." The soft hum of machines echoed through the sterile silence of the hospital's upper wing, a rhythm of beeps and mechanical sighs that had become the soundtrack of survival. But in that tension-heavy corridor nestled between the glass-enclosed NICU and the dimly lit ICU, something had shifted. Argos lay motionless, his massive frame curled precisely between the 2 rooms, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half-lidded but never truly asleep. He had chosen that spot deliberately, as if understanding that his presence was needed on both fronts. One breath closer to Finn, one heartbeat away from Nathan. The air carried a stillness that felt almost reverent. Emily stood at the nurse's station, the ends of her coffee gone cold in her hands, eyes locked on the monitors. 2 screens, 2 lives. On one side, baby Finn's vitals flickered on the NICU display. Oxygen saturation rising steadily, heartbeats strong and rhythmic, far steadier than it had been just hours before. On the other, in ICU room 12, Officer Nathan Reyes, still unconscious, still hovering in the delicate balance, showed subtle but significant signs of stabilization. Heart rhythm steadier, blood pressure inching toward baseline. She blinked at the timestamp. The peaks and troughs, they were aligning. "Emily," said Dr. Mercer, her voice low but urgent as she joined her at the station. "Are you seeing this?" "I thought I was imagining it," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's real, isn't it? Their vitals are sinking." Dr. Mercer nodded slowly, scrolling back through both patient charts. "Every spike, every drop. It's almost like they're talking to each other," Emily finished, staring at Argos. "Through him." And a silence settled between them that wasn't empty, it was heavy, thick with the kind of awe that didn't need words, the kind of awe usually reserved for miracles. Down the hall, a junior intern named Clara, fresh out of residency, her badge still stiff at the edges, had paused on her way to drop off lab work. She noticed them hovering, noticed the dog lying like a sculpture carved in loyalty between life and life. "Is that the dog they tried to remove?" she asked softly, joining them. Dr. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on Argos now, too.
"Yes."
"And he hasn't moved from that spot all day?" "Not once," Emily said. "Not to eat, not to drink. He just watches them. Listens, maybe." A few more steps, a few more pages turned in the hospital's invisible book of unspoken things, and the ripple effect began. The cardiac intern, Jason, passed by to check ICU rhythms and paused as he double-took the overlay Emily had printed. "Wait, are those Finn's vitals over Nathan's?" Emily nodded. "Overlaid, yes. I wanted to be sure." Jason whistled low. "That's impossible. There's no medical tether. They're not even in the same treatment loop." "I know." He stared at the graphs a long time, then glanced over at Argos, eyes narrowing like someone trying to solve a riddle without the edges of the puzzle. "Maybe he is the tether," Jason murmured. Within hours, the whisper had become conversation. The conversation became cautious observation. Doctors, nurses, residents, even a few custodians moving about with slower steps, now casting longer glances toward the German shepherd lying like a relic in the corridor. By early evening, the term Argos effect had begun to circulate, first in jest, then in curiosity. "Are you tracking the Argos effect?" someone had asked jokingly in the break room. But by shift's end, they were. The hospital's chief neurologist, Dr. Rajan, leaned into the records that night with guarded skepticism. "Correlation is not causation," he said under his breath, but even he couldn't deny the timestamp patterns. Emily sat by the window just outside Finn's room, her fingers curled around the sealed letter she still kept folded in her scrub pocket. She hadn't let it go, not since the confrontation with Matthews. It was more than a message now. It was a thread connecting all of this, Nathan, Finn, Argos, and something far larger than sterile procedure could measure. As the hallway lights dimmed to nighttime tones, casting everything in soft amber, Argos finally stirred. He lifted his head slowly, ears tilting slightly toward the NICU. He exhaled a low huff, more breath than sound. Emily followed his gaze. Finn's chest rose steadily, his hands so impossibly small twitching slightly, like they were feeling for something in the dark. Then Argos shifted just an inch, his body angling more toward the ICU now. Monitors ticked. Nathan's oxygen intake increased by 2%. Another heartbeat steadied. It was as if the dog was a tuning fork, and both father and son were finding resonance through him. Emily rose to her feet, tears pooling without warning. How do you quantify that? How do you explain something that doesn't fit into charts or protocols, something that lives in the marrow of connection, in the unseen lines between one soul and another? The hallway remained hushed, reverent. Argos rested his head down once more. Still. Between two rooms, two pulses, one purpose. The machines in room 412 had hummed a monotonous rhythm for days, the kind of artificial lullaby that replaced the sound of life with beeping lines and sterile air. Nurses had learned to walk past it without flinching. Doctors checked the vitals like ticking boxes on charts. And Argos, the silent guardian, lay curled in the hallway between NICU and ICU, refusing to move far from the ones he had once protected in uniform and now protected with something far deeper: memory, loyalty, blood. Emily sat near Finn's incubator, trying to decipher the latest readout. His breathing was more rhythmic now, more confident, not the stuttered flutter it had been just days before. Her eyes, red from lack of sleep and emotion, lingered on the boy's chest as it rose and fell, small but alive. A flicker of a miracle. Then came the sound. A shift in air, a change in rhythm. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Argos's ears perked, and so did Emily's heart. The ICU monitor in Nathan Reyes's room blipped in a new pattern. Not erratic, just different. A longer breath. A twitch. Then two. Then three. The line on the screen jumped, hesitated, and resumed its cautious climb. Emily didn't wait for permission. She rose as if pulled, not by duty but instinct, some current running through her that whispered, "Now." As she approached the room, she noticed Argos rise too. Stiff at first, then alert, head tilted as if catching a scent no one else could. The hallway, once filled with quiet murmurs and the shuffle of charts, became still. Inside the room, Nathan's fingers curled slightly against the white sheet. Emily's voice caught in her throat. "Nathan?" she whispered, barely daring to hope. And then it happened slow, shaky, but unmistakable. Nathan Reyes opened his eyes. A flicker at first, as if pushing through a fog miles thick. Then a squint, reacting to the harsh fluorescent light. A breath, shallow, ragged, but real. Emily gasped, hand flying to her mouth. For a moment she couldn't move. The monitors beeped faster, not in alarm, but in response, heart rate rising. Nathan's gaze searched the room, pupils slow to focus. His lips parted, a dry rasp escaping. "Argos?" The name broke something inside her. Emily pressed forward, tears springing without restraint. "I'm here," she whispered, fingers trembling as they brushed his wrist. "He's here. So is Finn. You made it." Nathan tried to speak again, but the effort taxed him. His brow furrowed, a trace of pain in his eyes. "Finn," he croaked. Emily nodded, choking on relief. "He's alive. He's in the NICU. Fighting. Just like you." A long exhale left Nathan's chest, as if some part of him, the deepest part, had been waiting to know that his son had not been lost in the smoke and sirens, that the bond hadn't been severed by fate. Behind her, the door creaked open softly. Argos padded in, unhurried, solemn, as if pulled by an invisible thread that bound him to this moment. His paws made no sound against the polished floor. He reached the bedside and sat. Nathan's eyes widened, glistening. "Buddy," Argos lowered his head almost in a bow. Emily could feel it, the unspoken exchange passing between man and dog, something older than words, something earned. "He never left," she whispered. "He wouldn't leave Finn's side. We didn't even know who he was, until the photo, and then the letter." Nathan turned toward her slightly. "Later." She reached into her scrub pocket and gently placed the worn envelope on the table near him. "You wrote it, in case you didn't make it. It was in your effects. You asked us to let Argos protect your son." Nathan stared at the envelope as if seeing a piece of his own soul sealed within. His breath shuddered. A tear escaped, tracing a line down his bruised cheek. "He found him, didn't he?" Nathan whispered. Emily's voice cracked. "Yes, he did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of things not spoken aloud. A burning building, a desperate cry, a dog pushing through ash and flame not for duty, but for love. Argos laid down again, this time placing his head gently on the floor beneath Nathan's outstretched hand. The man's fingers, bruised but alive, reached out, touched fur, familiar, safe. A sob built in Emily's chest and spilled out in a quiet stream. Down the hall, staff began to gather, drawn not by protocol, but something older. A nurse whispered to another, "He woke up." A respiratory intern peeked in, eyes wide. "Doctor." Mercer entered, arms crossed, jaw tight, not from irritation, but from holding back emotion. He met Emily's eyes. "How long ago?" "Just now," she said. "He asked for Argos and Finn, in that order." Dr. Mercer nodded slowly. "I guess we'll update the board. First contact, N." He looked at Argos, then at Nathan, and something softened. "Let him stay," Nathan whispered, as if sensing the conversation behind him. "He's family." Emily's lips trembled. "He already is." For hours, Argos had remained still, his body stretched between the walls of life and almost loss, resting in the corridor where the lights never dimmed and hope flickered like an IV line clinging to rhythm. His ears twitched at every soft murmur, every distant beep, but his eyes, those tired, amber sentinels, never left the door across the glass. The door where the father lay. And then, a shift. A fluta almost imperceptible at first. Nathan's monitor let out a new tonot sharp, not alarming, but alive. Inside the ICU, Nathan's eyelids trembled before parting like curtains after a long intermission. His pupils searched the ceiling, unfocused. A breath shallow, but intentional broke past his lips. His lips moved, dry and cracked, struggling to push out something not meant for anyone in white coats. Argos. It came like a gasp, a ghost of a name wrapped in gravel and effort. "Finn?" The room held its breath. Emily had been three-seated silently, clasping the edge of the bed with both hands, as if she were holding on to Nathan's threadbare life through sheer will. Her head jerked up at the sound. Disbelief, like a dam cracked by hope, flooded her face. "Nathan?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Nathan, it's me. It's Emily. You're okay. You're back." He blinked once, twice, as if testing the reality of her voice. Then slowly, with the stiffness of a body unused to moving his, hand lifted half an inch from the sheet. Argos stirred. Down the hall, just as Emily reached to touch Nathan's hand, the old dog's head lifted. There was no sound, no call, no command. But Argos knew. He knew in the quiet. His ears tilted forward. His nose twitched, Thenslow, deliberate. Like the tide turning after a long winter night, this tale swept across the floor once. Just once. A single wag, like a note struck in the perfect pitch of recognition. Nurse Joanna, who had grown used to the sight of the still figure at the threshold between NICU and ICU, gasped from behind the counter. "He moved," she whispered to no one and everyone. "He's wagging." "Doctor." Mercer, on rounds just feet away, turned at the ripple. He saw the dog lift his head fully now, spine pulling taut as his body angled toward the ICU. No bark, no leap, just focus, like a soldier recognizing the return of his commander. Inside, Nathan's eyes drifted toward the open glass. He couldn't see clearly, but it was as though he sensed the presence anchoring him. His lips curled barely, subtly into something like a smile. That was all it took. The monitors responded as if orchestrated. Finn's tiny incubator let out a soft chirp. His heart rate rose still within safe bounds, but undeniably climbing. Oxygen saturation followed, as though his body had tuned into the unseen signal. One NICU nurse checked his vitals. "Look at this," she said, her voice trembling. Again, just like last time, but bigger. On the ICU floor, silence descended. It was not fear, it was reverence. No one told Argos to go to Nathan's room. No one dared stop him. "Doctor." Mercer opened the door before anyone asked him to, as if compelled by something older than protocol. "Let him in," Emily said quietly, brushing a tear from her cheek. Argos rose. Every step was measured. He didn't run. He walked stiff-legged from age, sore from hours of stone, still waiting but with purpose. Like an old guardian returning to the place he never truly left. As he entered, Nathan's gaze followed the sound of padded feet. "Hey, boy," Nathan rasped, broken voice trailing into a whisper. His chest shuddered with the weight of speech. "You stayed." Argos pressed his head gently against the edge of the bed, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the machines, not the records, not the sterile debates that had swirled for days. Just man and dog, just a father, a friend, and a promise fulfilled. Nathan's hand weak, but guided by memory lowered, and found familiar fur. A deep exhale left his lungs. The monitor softened into a steady rhythm. Emily leaned against the wall, unable to hold back the tears now. Not just tears of relief, but of witnessing something almost sacred. She watched as Argos settled at the foot of the bed, his body half-curled, one eye always open still on watch. Dr. Mercer didn't speak. He didn't need to. He looked down at the dog and then at the man, slowly stitching himself back into consciousness. "This is beyond anything I was taught," he muttered, almost to himself. "But maybe it's what we're meant to learn." From behind the glass, Matthews appeared once more, silent this time, his expression unreadable. But he didn't step in. He just watched. Because there was nothing to say when something ancient unfolded before you, something that reminded every person in that hospital of why they came into medicine in the first place. Connection, protection, unspoken loyalty. The night would stretch long, and the battles for recovery had only begun. But something shifted in those few quiet minutes. A truth settled into every heart present. Argos had never just been a dog. He was a promise made flesh, a bridge between father and son. And now finally, he was home. The hospital was quieter than usual that night. A soft drizzle tapped against the NICU windows like distant heartbeats, and the world inside pulsed to its own rhythm, the beeping of machines, the hushed footsteps of nurses, the whispers of hope and fear braided through every corridor. And in the midst of it all, Argos lay still, his thick coat rising and falling with breath so steady it could have been mistaken for sleep, but his eyes remained open, golden and alert, fixed on the small plastic cocoon that cradled Finn. It began subtly, like most of Argos' signals did. A twitch in his ears, a low breath that didn't quite qualify as a growl. Then he shifted just an inch, positioning himself closer to the incubator's base. His body coiled in tension, not aggression, but vigilance, like a soldier on watch. The nurses nearby exchanged glances. "Is he doing that again?" whispered Leah, the night nurse, pausing her chart updates. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and took a slow step toward Argos. The dog didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on Finn. Not 5 minutes later, Finn's oxygen saturation dipped slightly, a gentle warning on the monitors, but enough to earn a light from the central station. Leah was already moving before the alarm buzzed. "He knew," she muttered under her breath. It wasn't the first time. Over the past 48 hours, Argos had begun to anticipate the machines not replace them, but complement them in ways no one could explain. He would rise moments before a heart rate fluctuation, or place his paw gently against the glass before a drop in Finn's temperature. At first it seemed coincidental, A dog. Repositioning. Reflex. But then the patterns grew too consistent, too deliberate, too human. By the third occurrence that night, word had spread. Quietly. Reverently. Nurses didn't speak of it openly, as if naming the phenomenon would shatter its delicate magic. But their eyes said everything. Doctor. Mercer had taken to standing just outside the NICU when she could, not with the skepticism she wore days before, but with the haunted look of someone caught between science and wonder. She watched Argos more than she watched the monitors now. He was unmoving again, staring into Finn's space as if listening for something no one else could hear. "You're not just a protector, are you?" Mercer whispered, arms folded, breath fogging the glass slightly. "You're a bridge." Argos tilted his head, then looked at her, a gaze so piercing, so rooted in something deeper than instinct, that it forced her to look away first. She exhaled shakily, then scribbled a note in her journal, but she never finished it. Hours passed. The rain intensified outside, as if the storm too were holding vigil. Nurses moved gently around Argos, now not stepping over him, but with him, as though his presence was as vital as the machinery humming nearby. A few interns began logging his behaviors out of curiosity, matching them against Finn's vitals in real time. And the results startled everyone. A soft whine from Argos preceded a shift in blood pressure by 2 minutes. A tail twitch came 90 seconds before a desaturation. One time, he stood completely and faced the door seconds before the monitor let out a shrill warning. It wasn't predictive, it was intuitive. And more than one nurse found herself wondering if perhaps Argos wasn't reacting to vitals but to something else, something more primal, some unspoken rhythm that connected him to the child beyond biology. Emily entered quietly just before dawn. Her shoes were soaked from the rain, her eyes glassy from too little sleep and too much heartache. But when she saw Argos stationed there still, determined, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She knelt beside him, smoothing her palm down his back. "You haven't left, have you?" she whispered. He responded with a nudge of his head against her ribs, then looked back toward Finn. The boy stirred lightly in his incubator, a flicker of movement, a curl of fingers that hadn't been there hours before. Emily gasped, not because of the motion, but because of what followed. Argos stood. Finn's heart rate climbed not dangerously, but markedly, as if something had reached across the space between them and sparked recognition. Emily's voice broke in her throat. "He knows." Mercer appeared then, slow and hesitant, clipboard pressed to her chest. "We've confirmed the data," she said softly. "His responses, they line up, across the board. You're saying he's sensing things before they happen?" Mercer hesitated. "I'm saying I no longer have the language for what he's doing, only that it's real." Emily nodded. She didn't need science to affirm what her heart already knew. That night, a small sign appeared on the NICU wall above Argos's usual spot. No one claimed to have written it, but no one took it down either. "Silent guardian on duty. Please observe with respect." Even the head of security walked around the dog now, instead of ordering his removal. Matthews, who had returned once more with quiet protest, found himself silenced by a look from Doctor, Mercer, and the hum of solidarity from the staff. For once, bureaucracy didn't speak louder than the unexplainable. Argos shifted again, just after midnight. Resting his chin on his paws, his eyes never leaving Finn. Somewhere in the ICU, Nathan's heart monitor beeped steady, stronger than before. And though no words passed between them, though walls and machines separated man from child from dog, something invisible pulsed through the air, a current of knowing, of loyalty, of love. The walls of the NICU had grown quieter in the past few days, not from lack of motion, far from it, but from a kind of collective reverence. Whispers replaced footsteps. Notes were passed with the gravity of scripture. And in the center of it all lay Argos' chest, rising and falling in sync with two lives too fragile to speak for themselves. Emily sat on the edge of a plastic chair, her back arched forward, not from poor posture but from an emotional pull toward the heart of the mystery. Finn's incubator on her left, Nathan's ICU bay on her right, and Argos in the corridor that tethered the two like a bridge made of breath and bone. She flipped through her notebook, not one issued by the hospital, but one she'd brought from home, a pale green moleskin with frayed corners. Inside it, she'd begun logging what no textbook had prepared her for. 3:04 a.m., Argos whined before Finn's O2s dipped. Monitors followed 15 seconds later. 3:36 a.m. Nathan's heart rate elevated after Argos shifted to face ICU door. 5:17 a.m. Finn's breath stabilized while Argos pressed his nose to incubator glass. There were pages of it now, not medical records, not hard science, just an observant nurse, a former soldier's dying request, and a dog whose instincts transcended algorithm. Presence therapy, she whispered aloud, tapping her pen against her lip. Dr. Mercer, standing by the nurse's station, reviewing vitals, looked up. "What did you say?" Emily turned. "Presence therapy," she repeated, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. "I mean, it's not clinical or anything, just that's what it feels like." He's not doing anything in the traditional sense. He's not administering medication, not adjusting machines, but he's here. And they're responding. "Doctor," Mercer tilted his head thoughtfully. "So it's not about what Argos does, but simply that he is." Emily nodded. "Exactly. His presence creates this invisible feedback loop. You can almost feel it, like static in the air before a storm. But instead of chaos, it brings clarity. He senses things before the monitors catch up." Mercer walked closer, gaze fixed on Argos. The dog, as if sensing the attention, opened his eyes for a moment, but didn't move. His ears twitched slightly, just enough to say, "I'm listening too." "You think it's learned behavior?" Mercer asked. "I don't think this is about training anymore," Emily said. "I think it's about connection, maybe even memory." A young resident named Jonah, barely past his boards, had been listening nearby while pretending to sort supply bins. He approached cautiously, holding a clipboard and looking like someone about to interrupt a sermon. "Sorry, but I've been observing too," he said. "I charted Finn's temperature shifts from last night. Every significant change, Argos adjusted position within a minute beforehand. That's statistically abnormal." Mercer raised a brow. "Abnormal? How?" Jonah flipped his clipboard around and showed a scatterplot with manually annotated timestamps. "See these spikes? They're not random. They correlate with when Argos either whined, stood, or physically moved closer to the incubator. And it's not just Finn. Nathan's blood pressure had a drop that preceded Argos pawing at the ICU door. It's like he knew the moment Nathan was about to wake." They all looked at Argos again. He remained still, but his chest rose with a soft exhale that almost sounded like a sigh. Whether of weariness or understanding, no one could tell. Emily returned to her notebook and underlined the phrase presence therapy in bold. For the first time in her career, she felt the boundaries of medicine blur, not in a way that threatened truth, but expanded it. Like discovering that the night sky had more stars than previously thought, not because they just appeared, but because someone finally looked closely enough. A few more residents joined, drawn not by an official memo, but by the magnetic stillness Argos carried. They asked questions, took notes but differently now, not just about vitals, but about the environment. What was the lighting like when Argos stirred? Were certain sounds triggering? Did scent matter? Emily encouraged them to document everything, not because it was policy, but because for once, it felt sacred. In an unused corner of the NICU, they set up what they jokingly called the observation wall. It started as a whiteboard. Soon it became a mosaic-colored post-its, pinned notes, sketches of Finn's crib position, time logs, Argos's shifts, a timeline of intuition, a map of invisible threads. Dr. Mercer began adding his own annotations. 8:22 a.m. Argos remains alert though vitals stable. Anticipation? 9:03 a.m. Emily hums to Finn. Argos visibly relaxes. Emotional transference? For a hospital governed by rules, it was an anomaly. But it was also alive, breathing, learning. By noon, someone had brought in coffee for everyone. No one had left since dawn. Emily sipped hers slowly, watching Argos blink in slow, steady rhythms, as if synchronizing with both heartbeats he was somehow tethered to. She wondered how much he remembered, how much he knew. She'd stopped questioning whether it was possible. The evidence was no longer just data points. It was in the way people spoke softer now, walked gentler, watched each other with new respect. In a profession built on science, they were witnessing something beautifully unquantifiable. And still, Argos stayed. As evening light spilled through the NICU blinds in golden stripes, Someone from the research department entered with a tablet and a hesitant smile. "We heard there's something worth documenting here." Dr. Mercer glanced at Emily, then back to the young researcher. "There's more than something," he said. "There's a story unfolding, and for once, we're not the ones writing it. We're just bearing witness." Emily looked down at her notebook once more, where she'd begun drafting a proposal unofficial, handwritten, deeply personal. The title at the top read, "The Argos Effect, an inquiry into presence, intuition, and unspoken healing." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Dedicated to those who show us healing is not always clinical sometimes. It just lies quietly at your feet." Finn moves a finger, opens eyes. Nathan begins breathing on his own. Argos places his paw gently on the space between them. The hospital at night feels like another world entirely. The rhythm slows. Lights dim. Monitors beep in a softened cadence. The world beyond the glass walls fades into silence, and all that remains is the breathless stillness of hope, of waiting. Inside the neonatal ICU, the shift change had passed hours ago, leaving only a skeleton crew and the quiet presence of Argos lying once again in his chosen position between two rooms and two lives. The staff had learned not to question it anymore. He wasn't just a dog now. He was there, a presence, an anchor, a quiet sentinel whose silence somehow made everything feel more watchful, more alive. Nurse Danny, on her third cup of decaf and final round of chart updates, looked up from her station when she heard it, not a bark, not a growl, but the soft shift of paws on linoleum. Argos had risen. He stood with a slow stretch, tail down but alert, ears forward. He moved carefully, not rushed toward the NICU crib where baby Finn lay, his tiny body cocooned in tubes and blinking lights. Argos sat. Then, after a long pause, he tilted his head and let out a low whine barely audible, almost reverent. Danny stood, her heart suddenly on edge. The last time Argos had done this, Finn's oxygen levels had dipped sharply, moments before the machines caught up. But this time, the numbers were steady. Still, Danny stepped closer, checking the monitor, pressing lightly on Finn's blanket-wrapped foot. "Hey there, little fighter," she whispered, more out of comfort than protocol. "You okay tonight?" Then she saw it, the smallest movement. His left pinky finger aflutter, a twitch like the brush of wind against glass. Danny gasped. Her breath hitched in her chest as she leaned closer. "Finn?" she said softly, her voice cracking, barely daring to believe. Another twitch. Then, with the slowness of a sunrise, both lids fluttered open hazy, unfocused but undeniably open. "Doctor, someone get Mercer," she yelled down the hall, already reaching for the intercom with trembling fingers. Across the hallway, in the adult ICU, Dr. Mercer was at Nathan's bedside. The room was dark, save for the soft green hue of the ventilator screen. Nathan had remained stable but quiet. His recovery had plateaued for nearly 2 days, a holding pattern of hope that never quite broke through. Until now. The second Danny's voice pierced the quiet. Argos turned. He pivoted with a grace that belied his size, padded to the center of the hallway between Finn and Nathan, and stopped. Then, slowly, he lowered his front legs in a bowing motion, resting his chest close to the cool floor. His paw extended, not quite reaching either room, but placed exactly at the midpoint. A moment later, the ventilator beeped, just once, then dropped. Nathan's chest rose, on its own. Mercer blinked at the screen. Then again. He rushed forward, calling to a nurse. "Disconnect the machine carefully. He's breathing. He's initiating breaths." And then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, Nathan's eyes opened. Not wide, not fully aware, but awake, breathing, alive. "Argos." Nathan's voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Where's Finn?" Mercer's eyes filled. The nurse beside him clutched her chest. "He's asking about Finn," Mercer said, almost in disbelief. At that very moment, on the other side of the glass, Finn's eyes opened wider. He didn't cry, not yet, but his breathing deepened. His limbs moved, slow and clumsy, but deliberate. The two lives, once separated by age, space, and silence, pulsed now on some invisible thread, and Argos lay at its center. Emily, awakened by the nurse's knock, stumbled down the hallway barefoot, still in her scrubs from earlier. She reached the NICU in time to see Danny crying, Mercer stunned, and Argos' unmoving paw still on the threshold. "What happened?" she asked, panic rising. They woke up," Danny said through tears. "Both of them. At the same time." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, staggering slightly. She turned to Argos, who now looked up at her, eyes deep and still, then back to the rooms as if to say, "Look what they did. Look what they remembered." She fell to her knees beside him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Oh my God, thank you." Argos didn't move. He didn't wag. He just closed his eyes slowly, as if in prayer, and let his paw rest where it was, bridging a miracle neither science nor speech could explain. Behind him, the hallway filled quietly with figures in scrubs, slippers, and silent awe. It was past midnight. There was no formal announcement, no press, just two hearts beating in unison again, and a dog who simply knew. In that stillness, the hospital became more than a place of healing. It became a witness to love, to connection, to the unexplained mercy of being seen even in silence. And Argos, ever the quiet guardian, kept watch not for reward, not for credit, but because something inside him had always known this moment would come. He was never just following orders. He was following them. The conference room felt colder than usual. Dr. Mercer stood at the head of the long table, his hands resting on the worn mahogany edge, knuckles white. Behind him, the first rays of morning cracked against the skyline, pouring pale light through the blinds. Nurses, residents, and attending physicians sat in silence coffee cups, half drunk, not from forgetfulness, but the weight of what this meeting meant. Argos was not here, but somehow his presence lingered. Emily sat closest to Mercer, shoulders straight, eyes glassy from another sleepless night. She hadn't left the NICU in nearly 72 hours, her body running on instinct alone. In her lap rested a small notepad filled with scrawled patterns Finn's vitals, Nathan's improvements, and the times Argos had shifted, whined, or laid between the beds like a living bridge. She didn't speak yet. Neither did Mercer. Matthews was the last to arrive. His entrance was as deliberate as ever, clipboard under one arm. Expression unreadable. But there was something in his posture this morning. Not resistance. Hesitation. Mercer cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gavel. "This consult is off record, but it's real. More real than any protocol we've ever written." He nodded toward the screen at the end of the room. A slide lit up. 2 EKG graphs pulsed side by side, Finn and Nathan, matching rhythms. Matched over time. Then another slide. Temperature, oxygen, saturation, stress levels. A pattern no one could deny anymore. "What we're seeing," Mercer continued, "is a relationship physiological, emotional forming between Nathan and Finn through the presence of the dog. Not just emotional support, measurable stabilization, simultaneous recovery." He paused. The next sentence hung on the edge of something holy. "I'm recommending we allow Nathan and Finn to be in the same room, together, with Argos." A tremor passed through the table. One nurse covered her mouth. Another exhaled softly like a prayer had just been spoken aloud. Matthews scoffed quietly. "Dr. Mercer, let's not romanticize data. You want to take an intubated neonate and wheel him into an ICU room with a recovering trauma patient and a dog because of a few coincidental vitals?" "It's not coincidence," Emily said, finally raising her voice. "It's connection." She opened her notebook and held up a page. "This was last night, 2:14 a.m. Finn's heart rate dropped 3 seconds before any machine picked it up. Argos stood, stared through the NICU glass toward Nathan's room. Then his tail moved. One wag. And at 2:17 a.m., Nathan began stabilizing again. A resident from the back added, "I was on rotation. I saw it too." Mercer leaned forward, locking eyes with Matthews. "No one's suggesting recklessness, but there is precedent for modified palliative therapy, family interaction under controlled infection protocols, even kangaroo care for neonates under certain conditions. Why is this different?" "Because it's emotional," Matthews said flatly. "And because if it fails, will be crucified for indulging it. The word indulging made Emily's jaw clench. Is it indulgent? She asked softly. To follow what's saving them? The room was quiet again. Mercer switched the screen. A live feed from the NICU appeared. Argos, asleep, muzzle tucked under one paw, lay between the NICU glass wall and the hallway door. Still, patient, like a monk at vigil. Then, as if on cue, his ears perked up. Finn's heart rate fluttered, slightly visible on the overlay. Nothing dangerous, but enough. Argos shifted, moved closer, laid his head against the wall that separated him from Nathan's room, and Finn's vitals steadied. Dr. Mercer turned back to the group, his voice gentler now. This isn't about rules. It's about the possibility that we're witnessing something beyond science, but not outside of it. Something that doesn't ask for us to understand it fully, only to honor it. Matthews didn't speak for a long while. He looked down at the charts, then the screen, then at the young residents who had been following every beat of this saga with wide, awakening eyes. His own gaze faltered for a moment, just long enough for honesty to slip through. He cited, 24 hours, one contact period, monitored closely, full sanitation prep and barrier precautions. Emily inhaled sharply, hope and disbelief folding into the same breath. Mercer nodded once, solemn. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Matthews added. If either of them destabilizes, it ends, immediately. No extensions. That's all we need, Emily said. Her voice broke just slightly. She stood, leaving the notepad on the table. As she turned, Mercer caught her eye. There are some things, he said softly, that medicine wasn't built to explain, but maybe to witness. As the door closed behind them, a silence settled. Not empty, not tense, reverent. In the halls beyond, Argos stood. No one had called him, but he knew. His body leaned slightly toward ICU room 5, where Nathan now breathed unassisted, and toward the NICU, where Finn had opened his eyes just yesterday. 2 lives, born on the brink, now held by one quiet sentinel waiting for the door to open. The hallway between the ICU and the NICU felt longer than ever. Every fluorescent light overhead flickered as if hesitating to illuminate what was about to unfold. The soft whir of machines, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the muffled footsteps of night shift nurses all faded into the background, drowned beneath the weight of what this moment meant. After weeks suspended between fear and hope, the journey was no longer metaphorical. It was literal now, and every inch of tile was sacred. Nathan clutched the sides of the wheelchair, his knuckles pale beneath bruised skin. He hadn't been this close to Finn since the accident. Not in any real sense. The dreamlike haze of the hospital, the surgeries, the sedation had created a strange, painful distance. But this was different. He was going to see his son. His fingers trembled not from weakness, but anticipation. His breath came shallow. Too much emotion threatened to break loose at once. He couldn't afford that yet, not before he looked Finn in the eyes. Argos padded silently beside him. Not leashed, not commanded, just there. As though sensing the importance of this journey, the dog's posture was upright, movements deliberate. He walked in rhythm with the slow push of the wheelchair. And every time Nathan's breath hitched or a spasm gripped his side, Argos would glance up just once, just briefly, as if to say, I'm here, keep going. The NICU doors were already open. Dr. Mercer stood inside, flanked by 2 NICU nurses and an intern who had tears threatening the corners of her eyes. Emily hovered near the far end, one hand resting lightly on the incubator's rim, as if grounding herself. The other hand clutched the necklace she hadn't taken off since the crash Finn's first hospital bracelet, looped with her wedding ring. Everything in the room had shifted. Furniture had been gently moved aside. The monitors had been carefully repositioned. Even the curtains had been drawn back, letting the moonlight in, softening the harshness of overhead bulbs. For this moment, the NICU wasn't a place of cold policy. It was a cathedral of breath and bond. Nathan's wheelchair rolled in slowly. Each foot of approach made the room stiller. Argos stopped at the edge of the incubator first. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply sat down, front paws close together, tail wrapped neatly, and lifted his head with quiet reverence, like a soldier standing at attention for a returning commander. Emily looked up, eyes already glassy. She inhaled shakily, stepped aside, and whispered, "Go slow. He can hear you." "A wind." Nathan blinked hard, forcing clarity through the veil of rising tears. His voice, when it came, cracked like an old hinge. "Finn?" The incubator had been unlocked. Slowly, reverently, one of the nurses lifted the clear dome and gently adjusted the wires and tubes so Nathan could see his son without obstruction. Finn's tiny chest rose and fell with effort, but it rose. His skin, once bluish and ghost pale, had found the faintest blush of color. The tube taped beneath his nose had droplets of condensation, the simplest proof of breath. Life, presence. And then his eyes opened. They didn't focus yet. They darted and fluttered, like he was searching through water. But the second Nathan whispered again, soft, breathless, fragile. "Hey, buddy, it's me." Finn stilled. For a heartbeat, the room held itself in absolute silence. Not even a machine beeped. Not even a breath broke. And then, with effort that seemed to summon the universe into his limbs, Finn's head turned ever so slightly. His eyes caught the silhouette of the figure in the wheelchair and stopped wandering. Locked in. First contact. Father and son. A noise broke from Nathan's chest, somewhere between a sob and a laugh, but he held it in. His hand, shaking, reached forward to hover just inches from Finn's. He didn't touch Not yet. He couldn't, but that gap held more meaning than any gesture could have. "You came back to me," he whispered. "You held on." Argos shifted. Slowly, silently, he moved forward and placed his paw gently on the floor between them, halfway between the wheelchair and the incubator. No movement, no sound, just contact. A bridge, once again. Between two fragile heartbeats, Dr. Mercer cleared his throat gently, not to interrupt, but to note something profound. The monitors were syncing. Nathan's heart rate had slowed, steadied. Finn's oxygen saturation was rising small increments, but real. Emotional contact registered in the data. Hope reflected in numbers. Nurses exchanged quiet glances. No one dared speak. Even Matthew Shue had reluctantly allowed this moment stood outside the room, watching through the glass. And for the first time in days, his lips parted with no reprimand. Just awe. Nathan leaned forward as much as his ribs would allow. Argos shifted to support the side of the wheelchair without being asked. Emily stepped behind him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders, grounding him. "Your brother's a fighter," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Just like you." Nathan nodded. His lips were trembling, but his voice was clear when he whispered again. "We made it, Finn. You hear me? We're here. We made it." A soft chime echoed from the monitor. One of Finn's fingers twitched. Argos's ears perked. Nathan saw it too, and tears finally broke loose down his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them. The NICU had seen medical marvels. But this moment, this fragile, trembling, breathing moment between father, son, and Sentinelthus was something else. Something no protocol could explain. The room was so still it could have shattered. Nathan sat in the wheelchair, his body trembling not from weakness alone, but from something far deeper, a kind of ache only silence knows. The kind that stretches between what was lost and what might still be saved. The incubator, glowing faintly in the dimmed light, held more than just life. It held every second of waiting, every breath borrowed on hope. And Finn, small as a breath himself, lay within it, his chest rising with uneven rhythm, a rhythm that seemed too fragile for the world. Argos, ever faithful, stood pressed against Nathan's leg, his nose lifted toward the incubator. He hadn't moved since they brought Nathan in. No bark, no sound, just presence. A sentinel between worlds. Dr. Mercer stood at the corner, arms crossed, eyes fixed not on the vitals but on the distance between father and son. That final inch of untraveled space. "Nathan." Emily's voice was a whisper. "If you're ready." He didn't answer. His right hand, the one untouched by IVs or tape, lifted slowly, like reaching through thick water. Every muscle fought him. But it wasn't pain that made it hard. It was reverence. The silence deepened. In the cradle of clear walls and regulated warmth, Finn's tiny fingers, wrinkled like old paper, flexed once. Then again, as if reaching, as if waiting. And then it happened. Nathan's fingertip touched the back of Finn's hand. Not a grasp, not a grip, just skin to skin. A whisper of touch, a question between two beings separated by all that life and death had thrown at them. Finn's fingers closed. Not reflex, not random. He gripped. A soft, instinctive clutch. Desperate, almost, but steady. Like an answer to a call not spoken aloud. And in that moment, the monitors hummed. Not alarms, not warnings, but stability. Finn's erratic heart rate evened. Nathan's oxygen saturation climbed. A hush fell over the staff. Nurses paused mid-step. Residents didn't blink. One of them let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Dr. Mercer whispered it first, as if afraid the words might scare the moment away. "They're sinking." Emily covered her mouth. Her tears weren't loud this time. They just fell. Argos let out a sound then, barely a bark, more like a sigh shaped into sound. The kind of noise that didn't demand attention but marked something, like the last page of a book being turned, like a gate quietly unlocking. Nathan stared at his son's hand around his finger. His voice came hoarse, cracked from days of silence. "He's so small." "Yes," Emily nodded through tears, but he waited. "You don't." Nathan's hand began to tremble again, but this time it wasn't from fatigue, it was release. The kind that breaks in after too many days of holding in everything that hurts. "I thought he'd never." He didn't finish. Finn moved then. Not much. Just the smallest stretch of his leg, the twitch of a foot. But it was enough. Nathan leaned forward, forehead coming to rest on the side of the incubator. His hand never moved from Finn's grasp. "You stayed," he whispered, not to anyone else but to himself. Or maybe to the boy who had somehow, against every odd, held on. Emily knelt beside them, her hand on Nathan's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. This wasn't a moment to explain. Argos sat. Quiet. His eyes never left the pair. "I don't know how to be a father," Nathan confessed into the glass, voice nearly gone. I didn't think I deserved to be." And then something extraordinary happened. Finn's monotony and blue lit spiked. Gently. Just a pulse. A change. Like a reply. Emily's breath caught. "You are now," she said. "Whether you're ready or not." Nathan closed his eyes. And in that quiet, the weight of regret, guilt, survival, hope all pressed against each other melted just a little. Enough for air to pass through. "I missed everything," he murmured. His first breath. His first cry. "But not his first memory," Emily said gently. "You're here." This will be his first memory, even if he never remembers it. Nathan turned his face toward Argos. "You knew." The dog didn't move, but his ears flicked forward, his head tilted slightly. "You brought me here." Dr. Mercer finally stepped forward, his clipboard forgotten in hand. He looked between the machines and the man and the dog. "I don't know how to document this," he admitted quietly. "You don't," Emily said. "You just let it happen." And for a moment, no one moved. Time didn't stop. It settled. Nathan sat there with his finger held tight in a hand the size of a plum pit, and the air in the room didn't feel sterile anymore. It felt earned, like something sacred had been unlocked by touch. Argos, finally, rose. He walked forward, slow and careful. He stopped just short of the incubator and laid down, one paw gently extended, not on the glass, not touching, but close enough for anyone to feel it. The line between life and love had just become real and thinner than we thought. And in that silence, as Nathan kept whispering promises, and Finn kept breathing on, and Argos kept watch, the universe rearranged itself. Just a little, but just enough. The morning light filtered through the slats of the pediatric ICU blinds, casting long stripes across the sterile whiteboard mounted on the wall. But today, there was something different on that board just beneath Finn's vitals, handwritten in blue ink by Nurse Alvarez. Argos. Sat up at 6:12 a.m. Finn's heart rate stabilized within 2 minutes. It was the third such entry this week. By noon, a laminated sheet titled Argos Observation Log had appeared next to Finn's chart. No one announced it. No official meeting was called. It simply showed up, quietly authored by Emily, co-signed by Dr. Mercerand, yet it felt inevitable, necessary, like acknowledging a silent hymn playing in the background that everyone had been humming without realizing it. Every shift change brought new notations. Argos whined at 3:47 a.m. Respiratory rhythm change detected at 3:49 a.m. Paced around bed at 11:08 a.m. Nathan became febrile at 11:15 a.m. Stood over incubator without command. Finn opened both eyes. The scribbles became data. The data became pattern. And the pattern began whispering what the machines could not yet say. Something extraordinary was happening. Something that didn't fit into columns or graphs but made its presence known in the steadying of monitors and the slowing of breath. Dr. Mercer stood at the foot of Finn's incubator that afternoon, holding the latest printed logs like scripture. Emily stood beside her, a highlighter in hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she ran the yellow band across another entry marked emotional shift. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He whined before the oxygen dipped again, she said, referring to Argos. But this time, it was almost like he was preparing us. It wasn't panic. It was warning. Mercer nodded slowly, the kind of nod reserved for things that couldn't be explained but also couldn't be denied. Behind them, Argos sat, motionless, ears perked, eyes trained on Finn's tiny figure beneath the soft blue glow of the incubator. His breath was quiet, calculated, reverent, as if he too knew this place had become something more than medical, something sacred. Across the hallway, Director Matthews paced outside the observation room. Through the glass, he could see the child, the dog, and the impossibility laid bare before him. He was not a cruel man. He had risen through policy, through protocol, through the certainty of things that could be measured. But now, a chart pinned to the glass caught his attention. Day 14. Argos moved before any staff noticed decline. Day 17. Barked once precisely 12 seconds before sepsis alert. Day 20. Paw placed on incubator. Heart rate normalized. Matthews closed his eyes. He had once argued against Argos remaining in the unit, called it a distraction, an ethical liability. But now, the data was betraying him. Or perhaps it was the soul of the place, the thing data couldn't always capture, that was rising up through the ink and charting its own kind of miracle. He turned to Dr. Mercer as she approached, the latest report in hand. "You're telling me this dog is functioning as an anticipatory monitor?" She didn't blink. "I'm telling you that we've been measuring the wrong things for a very long time." Matthews glanced back into the room. "And what do you call this?" Emily stepped up beside her, voice soft but sure. "We call it presence therapy." There was silence, not resistance, just the hush that follows a word too new to categorize, but too true to ignore. In the days that followed, the term spread. At first, it was whispered between nurses in the break room. "Did you log the presence marker?" "Yeah, Argos hasn't moved since Nathan's last tremor." Then it reached the residents' morning huddle. "We're tracking an Argos delta on emotional shift." "Wait, what's the emotional delta range again?" Eventually, even interns began observing him like a senior fellow on rotation. Argos, of course, remained unaware of the title he'd earned. He continued his silent vigils, rising before alarms, nudging a nurse's hand before an irregular heartbeat. He'd curl his body between the beds at dusk, head on paws, but eyes always half open, as if standing guard not just over lives, but over the space between them. One night, a resident named Kiranu, skeptical, sharp as a scalpel, stood alone beside Argos as the rest of the ward settled into its lull. She watched the dog breathe, his chest rising in rhythm with Finn's ventilator. "You're just a dog?" she murmured. "You don't know what those numbers mean." Argos didn't move. He didn't need to. At 2:13 a.m., Finn's oxygen dropped suddenly by 6 points. The machine had not yet caught up. Kira stared at her screen. Argos had already risen, tail stiff, body pointing. No noise, just presence. She blinked, swallowed, and reached for the emergency call button without hesitation. By the end of the week, Matthews stood in the boardroom with the compiled data, vitals, logs, video, the full arc of Finn and Nathan's story. On the last slide was an image. Argos' paw gently placed atop Nathan's foot, eyes closed, resting. Below it, the caption read, "When science pauses, presence continues." No one argued. No one had to. Matthews simply closed his folder and said, "Draft me the policy. We need to make room for what we can't yet explain." Other NICU infants show improved stats. Argos's presence is peaceful, calming beyond logic. The staff nickname him the healer in fur. No one could explain it, not entirely. Not Dr. Mercer, who had spent decades mapping neurology down to synaptic behavior. Not Emily, who had come to believe that maybe faith had a frequency. Not even Matthews, who stood in the corner of the NICU some nights with arms crossed, trying to hide the fact that he was no longer skeptical, just quietly overwhelmed. Argos had become a presence, not a visitor, not a mascot, something else. He moved through the ward with the silent authority of an old soul. No wasted steps, no dramatics, just presence. He would lay near one incubator, and the oxygen stats would stabilize. He'd shift toward another, and a heart rate that had been jagged for hours would begin to curve gently, like a stream settling after a storm. The monitors knew before the nurses did, and somehow, Argos knew before the monitors. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. The infants were already receiving world-class care. But the patterns began to pile up like snow outside a window, soft, persistent, undeniable. A baby girl named Willow had been struggling with apnea episodes for days. No clear neurological cause, no progress. One afternoon, Argos had wandered quietly to her station, rested his head on the base of the incubator, and closed his eyes. 26 minutes. That's how long Willow went without an episode after that. Then another stretch. Then another. No adjustments to medication. No new interventions. Just a dog and a heartbeat that somehow felt safer in his presence. It wasn't isolated. Room 4 had twin preemies born at 29 weeks. Fragile lungs. Uneven growth. The night Argos was moved into their wing for a routine check-in, both infants Milo and Janie experienced simultaneous reductions in their respiratory distress scores. The staff began jotting notes in the margins of their charts. 12. 47 Argos lay between twin beds. Milo calmed. Janie's breathing rhythmic. No meds adjusted. Asterisk. 4:32 a.m. Argos shifted after Milo startled. Heart rate returned to baseline. Eventually, the notes gained structure. An entire digital board was recoded to include Argos interaction logs. Nurses began trading quiet updates in the break room, like passing along weather forecasts. He stayed with Kaylee for 40 minutes last night. She hasn't decided once since. You should have seen him this morning, laid next to Noah, until his tremors stopped. No one said it too loudly, but everyone was beginning to believe it. Something in his body, or perhaps beyond his body, resonated with the fragile rhythms of life not yet shaped by the world. A therapist who specialized in developmental neuroplasticity began shadowing rounds. She didn't ask about dosages or apnea thresholds. She asked about energy, tone, light, proximity. She asked if anyone had recorded what kind of music had been playing when Argos last rested near a patient who later improved. Emily, her sleeves rolled past her elbows, had begun a small logbook handwritten the way her father used to write his prayers. Page after page listed names and timestamps. Finn, the 23rd of October, 3:04 a.m. Argos placed paw on glass. EEG curve changed immediately. Willow, the 26th of October. Argos licked side of isolette after nurse cried. Oxygen saturation held above 93% for 2 hours. Nathan plus Finn. Joint observation. Eye contact, Argos wagged, silence, both vitals improved. These weren't miracles, not in the blinding light from heaven sense. They were smaller, quieter, but the impact felt just as deep. It became routine to see residents gathered around Argos, not petting him but watching him like students studying a sacred text. They watched his eyes, his ears, how his chest rose when he laid beside an isolette, like he was matching breath with someone too small to match it on their own. A neonatal fellow from Baltimore flew in to observe the Argos effect, as one nurse began calling it. He didn't bring equipment. He brought his grandmother's rosary, tucked in his pocket like a reminder that science had its edges and sometimes things moved in the quiet beyond the data. And in the middle of it all, Argos remained unchanged. He didn't bark for attention. He didn't whine to be noticed. His only demand was presence. And perhaps, in a ward filled with machines, urgency, and aching hope, that was the rarest thing of all. One night, during a rare lull, Dr. Mercer stood at the window, watching the snow fall like static against the glass. Emily sat across the room. eyes half closed. A mug of tea cooling on the counter. Between them lay Argos, chin resting against his front paws, his body curled like a comma between two chapters. "You know," Mercer said softly, "I've written papers on neurofeedback and sympathetic regulation for over 20 years, but I've never seen a curve on a screen that responds faster than he does." Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned over, brushing a piece of lint from Argos's ear. He twitched, but didn't stir. "It's not just the science," she said finally. "It's the stillness. He gives it to them before they know they need it." Mercer nodded. "Stillness. And something else." "What?" He looked down at the dog and smiled, eyes suddenly glassy. "Permission to stay." It was in that moment that the staff began calling him something unofficial, but no less reverent. The kind of nickname that isn't crafted but revealed the way a title emerges when no other word will do. The healer in fur. At first, it was whispered, then written, then printed. A note taped to the staff fridge read, "Shift update. 4. Changes in room 3. Caffeine increased. In room 6. The healer in fur rested in room 1, all calm." By week's end, a laminated sign was posted outside the NICU, not as policy, but as a quiet prayer. Some healing comes in silence, some in medicine, and some on 4 quiet paws. Argos had become part of the rhythm. The NICU breathed with him now. And though no one dared to say it out loud, not even Mercer, there was a shared sense in the ward. They weren't just keeping these babies alive, they were helping them feel safe enough to choose staying. The first call came on a quiet Thursday morning. It was the kind of stillness that usually surrounded the NICU just before a wave of alarms. But this time, the only sound in the ward was Argos's gentle breathing as he lay curled beneath Finn's incubator, his ears alert, his posture regal, as though he knew he was being watched not just by the infants or nurses, but by something larger. "Good morning. This is KTSV Channel 5. We were hoping to speak with someone about a story we're hearing, about a German Shepherd who's been helping babies heal." The receptionist blinked twice. "Excuse me?" The reporter hesitated. "We're told there's a therapy dog, Argos, in the NICU at St. Augustine's, that he predicts vitals? That one of the babies opened his eyes the night Argos placed his paw between a father and son?" The words, once spoken in hushed tones within hospital walls, now hung over the front desk like an echo that wouldn't go away. By noon, 5 more media requests had arrived. Local news, a parenting blog, a national podcast, all asking the same questions, all tiptoeing around the word miracle. "Doctor." Mercer stood in the corner of the staff break room, holding a printed copy of the latest email. He didn't speak right away. Emily sat across from him, her tea untouched, her eyes scanning his face for signs. "They know," he finally said, his voice quiet. "The outside world knows." Emily glanced toward the hallway, where Argos sat like a sentinel near the NICU's security doors. The hushed reverence around the dog had deepened in recent weeks. Staff moved with more awareness. Parents whispered prayers near him. Charts now included not just vitals, but behavioral timestamps. Argos barked softly at 10:14 p.m. Finn's oxygen rose 2 points by 10:17. Nathan smiled for the first time by 10:25. It had started as instinct, then turned to patterns, then into something the hospital couldn't quite name. "They're calling him," Emily's voice caught. "They're calling him the Shepherd who heals." The hospital board convened an emergency meeting by end of day. Director Matthews sat at the head of the table, a man visibly worn down by policy and paradox. He had resisted for weeks anything that suggested magic or mysticism. "We are a hospital," he'd said more than once. "We deal in measurable outcomes." But lately, the measurable outcomes had bent around Argos's presence, like gravity. He stared at the email again, lips pursed. "Do we confirm the story?" someone asked. "Number." His voice was sharp. Then, after a pause, "Not yet. What do we tell them?" "That research is ongoing. That patient privacy is our first priority. That while therapy animals are sometimes present in pediatric settings, we cannot comment on individual cases." He leaned forward, eyes flicking between Emily, Dr. Mercer, and the hospital legal advisor. "But we will start a study, quietly, with full consent, controlled data collection, Emotional markers included. "Wait," one nurse asked gently. "You're authorizing it? Officially?" Matthews exhaled. "I'm not authorizing a fairy tale. I'm authorizing data. If there's even 1% chance this dog is helping patients heal faster, then we owe it to science and to those kids." That night, Argos remained unaware of the headlines beginning to form. He didn't know about the podcast recording across town, where a host whispered, "Some say he waits outside each incubator until a baby makes a sound." He didn't see the Reddit thread, already 200 comments long, titled, "NICU Dog Brings Baby Out of Coma." What is this? A Disney movie? He didn't care, because in the quiet corner of the NICU, he stood once again. Nathan was back in his wheelchair, eyes brighter, breath less labored. A nurse held the oxygen monitor gently in place while Emily helped adjust the incubator's angle. Finn was sleeping. But when Argos stepped forward and placed his paw on the side of the incubator, Finn stirred, a twitch, a flutter, and then his eyes opened again. A nurse gasped audibly. Another dropped her pen. And in that room, where beeping monitors had once sounded like countdowns to despair, they now pulsed in harmony like the heartbeat of something holy. The study would be named Project Presence. It would be logged discreetly under non-pharmaceutical interventions. Consent forms would be written in the gentlest possible language. Matthews would sign the approval at midnight, alone in his office, hands trembling slightly. And Argos? Argos would simply lie there, head resting on crossed paws, gaze fixed on the flickering light above Finn's bed as if he had known, all along, that one day the world would come looking. Not for answers, but for faith. The wheels of Nathan's force stand whispered against the linoleum as he took his first unaided steps that morning. No wheelchair, no nurse, no shaking hands clutching railings, just him upright, moving muscles, remembering how to trust again. Beside him, the incubator rolled gently, pushed by Nurse Hallie. Inside, Finn was wrapped in a soft navy blanket stitched with stars. His tiny eyelids fluttered, like he was syncing with his father's rhythm. Walking between them was Argus steady, alert, yet calm. His gait matched theirs perfectly, neither leading nor following. He was the bridge, the guardian, the silent metronome of their healing. Emily stood at the end of the hall, clipboard forgotten. She'd seen Nathan wheeled in, broken. She'd seen Finn surrounded by wires and beeping monitors. But this was different. This was synchrony, a rhythm bigger than biology. Nathan paused mid-hallway. He rested a hand against the incubator's side. "I'm here," he whispered. His voice no longer carried the rasp of grief, but something fuller like it remembered music. Finn stirred, not startled aware. His head turned toward the sound, his fingers flexing gently in the air, reaching for what was now real and close. Argos exhaled deeply and sat, his body positioned between father and son like a sacred marker. For a moment, the sterile corridor became something else, entirely a chapel for reunion. Nurse Hallie's voice cracked softly. "Finn saturation is up 4%. Respiratory stable." She didn't look at the screen. She was watching Nathan's fascia mix of disbelief, reverence, and rediscovery. A man not just surviving, but returning. Dr. Mercer, standing off to the side, murmured, "No wheelchair?" Hallie shook her head. "He walked in this morning. Said he had a promise to keep." No one moved. No one spoke. The moment needed air. Because for too long, this hallway had carried only the sound of loss. Today, it held something else. A father walking beside his son, and a dog who never left. Nathan sat slowly beside the incubator. His body acted not with weakness, but effort. The good kind. Hallie handed him a small bottle. "He's responding to oral feeds. Want to try?" He nodded and reached in with trembling hands. Not the tremor of sickness, but awe. The moment his fingers brushed Finn's lips, the baby latched instinctively. The room exhaled. Nathan did too, his breath catching mid-prayer. "That's it, buddy. You take your time." A single drop ran down Finn's chin. Nathan wiped it gently. His eyes welled, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Every second felt like another thread woven back into their unraveled tapestry. Argos didn't move, just watched. Quiet, unflinching, no alarms, no interruptions. Just the sacred sound of a child feeding and a father learning how to breathe again. Later that afternoon, Emily stood beside Dr. Mercer outside the family room. She held her tablet, its screen glowing with data. Every time Nathan's near Finis, especially with Argus, there's measurable improvement. Emotional regulation, respiratory alignment, even thermoregulation. But it's more than metrics. She paused. It's rhythm. They're syncing, father, son, and dog. Mercer stared down the hallway. We never trained for this. No, Emily said. But maybe we're meant to learn from it. Behind them, Argos padded quietly past, head high, movements unhurried. He walked back toward the NICU like he had rounds to make, as if time bent to his schedule. They began calling it the tide. Every 2 hours, Argos would rise, walk from Nathan's room to Finn's side. Sometimes he paused to rest between them. Sometimes he just sat, always listening ears, flicking to frequencies no machine could catch. Staff started rearranging shifts to honor his routine. Parents whispered like pilgrims. And sometimes, Argos didn't need to do anything. He just was. In a ward built on data, it was the dog with no credentials who showed them what healing looked like. Then came the day they called the opening. The incubator was off, tubes reduced. Finn had grown stronger, his breath more consistent, his sleep deeper. Nathan sat by the window, watching sunlight stripe across the floor like golden threads. Nurse Elena carried Finn forward. No glass, no wires, no barriers. Ready to meet him, little one? She whispered. Finn turned his head toward Nathan's voice. That same voice he had heard for 53 days through walls, through grief, through hope. Nathan opened his arms. The moment his son touched his chest, time itself shifted. Nathan released a breath he hadn't known he'd held for 2 months. He wrapped Finn against his gown, gently, reverently. The tiny boy pressed his cheek over his father's heart right where a faded tattoo read, "Begin again," as if he understood. Vitals held steady. Monitors didn't blink. Dr. Mercer watched silently from the doorway. Next to her, Director Matthews murmured, "We'll have to update protocol." Mercer smiled, eyes glassy. "No need. This is the protocol now." Even the janitor paused mid-mop, watching like it was the last scene of a film he hadn't meant to fall in love with. At Nathan's feet, Argos lay down. He didn't bark, didn't wag. Just rested his head on his his job done, for now. His gaze lifted to Nathan, then Finn. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, to be still in peace, the kind of peace only a fulfilled purpose can bring. Nathan whispered softly to his son, "You held on, so I could hold on too." Finn made a small sound to sigh. Maybe. One hand touched Nathan's collarbone. No machines needed to explain what had just happened. That evening, the NICU dimmed gently into the soft quiet of a sacred space. Emily stood by the window, holding a letter, its envelope worn from handling. She'd kept it for weeks, unread. But tonight, Nathan asked for it. He sat in the recliner beside Finn's bassinet, no longer an incubator. He wore the same hoodie from the night Finn was born, now washed, soft with wear. His arms cradled his son. Finn's hands moved like sea anemones flexing and curling with calm. Argos was there, curled nearby, eyes half closed but alert, always alert. "You sure?" Emily asked. Nathan nodded. "I want to hear it now. I need to remember who I was, to understand who I've become." Emily unfolded the letter slowly, as if unsealing memory. "Dear Finn, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you'll ever breathe on your own. But I love you. I love you in a way that hurts and heals and roots me in this world even when it feels impossible. You came into this world so small, and I came into fatherhood shattered. If I don't make it emotionally, not physically, please know I tried. Your mom is the strongest soul I know. If you inherit her heart, and maybe my stubbornness, you'll be unstoppable. Argos, he's your guardian. He's the reason I'm still here. Some nights, he laid his head in my lap and reminded me to keep breathing. I wrote this when hope felt like a fading signal. But holding this pen again, I realize you already saved me. Love, Dad." Emily's voice faltered at the end. She folded the letter and laid it quietly in Nathan's lap. No one said a word. No one had to. The silence in the room didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like arrival. Nathan didn't speak either. Tears spilled silently, carving trails down his cheeks, not the bitter kind from grief, but the warm ones born from the miracle of still being here, of having a second chance, of watching his son breathe against his chest without wires or tubes or beeping monitors dictating their rhythm. Finn stirred lightly and cooed, his tiny hand instinctively brushing against the tear on Nathan's cheek, as if acknowledging it, as if forgiving every dark thought that had once crept into that hospital room, as if choosing him. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Emily sank to her knees in front of them, arms wrapping around father and child, forehead resting gently against Nathan's shoulder. It was the first time they had all held each other fully, without fear of shattering the fragile balance. And in that moment, Argos stood. He moved closer, his body deliberate and slow, and pressed his wet nose against Nathan's hand. Then he gently licked it, not in excitement, but in recognition, as if saying, "You made it." Then, ever so gently, he nudged his muzzle to Finn's head, giving the softest nuzzle. It was not a farewell. It was a benediction, a knowing, a signal that something had come full circle. Emily looked up, tears in her lashes. "He knows, doesn't he?" Nathan nodded. "Yeah. He's always known." For a moment, the hospital room glowed not with fluorescent light, but with something more tender, something like closure, or maybe beginning. Down the hallway, nurses who had walked this journey with them, who had held their breath during the early nights, who had celebrated each tenth of a gram Finn gained, now stood in quiet witness. No one spoke. No one moved. They didn't have to. The scene said everything. And Argos, the dog who had defied textbooks, timelines, and probability curves, lay down again. But this time, it wasn't the watchful coil of protection. It was a rest earned, a rest granted. The sun filtered gently through the NICU windows that morning, casting a hush over everything. No cameras, no speeches, just the quiet kind of sacred you instinctively lower your voice for. Finn lay swaddled in the pale blue blanket Emily had once tucked away in hope. His eyes, once buried under wires and soft alarms, now blinked slowly beneath a tiny knitted cap. Beside him, Nathan stood steady, not the man who arrived in a wheelchair months ago, but a father now grounded by resolve. And between them, as ever, was Argos. No vest, no commands, just presence. The retired police dog stood silent, ears alert, body still, as if aware that this was no ordinary walk. Emily wiped under her eyes. No more soaked shirts from silent tears, just the kind you blink away with a smile. She kissed Finn, then Nathan, and ran her hand through Argos' fur one extra time. "Ready?" she whispered. Nathan nodded. "Yeah." His voice cracked gently. "Yeah, we are." The NICU doors opened. Lining the hallway were the faces who had quietly fought beside them. Nurses from both shifts, respiratory therapists, janitors, even Dr. Malarially seen outside his office stood near the elevator. No memo had been sent. People just knew Argos would lead them out today. He stepped forward first, head lowered slightly, each paw soft against the polished floor. Behind him, Nathan carried Finn with a reverence born not of fear, but of someone who knew just how much this moment cost. A nurse whispered, "He made it." Another touched Finn's blanket, blinking through tears. They moved slowly, not for show, but for meaning. Each step was a mile. Halfway down, Nathan paused. Argos had stopped ahead, glancing back. Their eyes met. "Thank you," Nathan mouthed. Argos blinked once, then walked on. At the corridor's end, Director Matthews stood not with a clipboard, but with a nod and her hand resting gently on the door. Outside, the world opened in gold and eucalyptus. Nathan stepped into the sun first. Emily followed. Then Argos, and time held still. There would be many firsts after this first steps, first fall, first laugh. But none would ever carry the gravity of this one, the first walk home, together. That evening, Nathan sat on a park bench with Finn nestled against his chest. The sun, folding into dusk, bathed everything in honeyed light. No monitors, no sterile halls, just the rustling of trees and the slow, sacred rhythm of breathing. Argos lay at Nathan's feet watchful. Yes, but softer now. Regal still, but without urgency. A little girl passed with her mother and stopped. "Can I pet him?" she asked. Nathan nodded. Argos tilted his head to meet her small hand. A single soft wag. She giggled. "He's a good boy," she whispered, skipping off. Nathan watched them go. "They have no idea," he murmured. "They have no idea what he's done." Argos blinked slowly, as if to say, it didn't matter. The baby stirred. Nathan kissed the top of his head. "You're here," he whispered. "And I am too." He looked down at Argos again.
"You think anyone will believe it wasn't just chance?"
Argos didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because the truth wasn't in the charts, it was in the silences. When Finn's vitals stabilized as Argos entered the room. When nurses lingered near him on hard nights. When NICU babies improved, measurably just by being close. It was in the way a family that nearly shattered, walked out whole. Later, as Nathan fed Finn under a slowly darkening sky, Argos rose and rested his head on Nathan's knee. Not a demand, just a gesture. Present, complete. "You know," Nathan said, "Emily thinks you're still on duty." He smiled. "But I think you loved him before we even knew how to." Silence. The warm kind. As the first star blinked into being, Nathan whispered, "Thank you." Argos didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the grass. And that was answer enough. Up on the hospital's 4th floor, something had quietly changed. The sterile hallway felt lighter. Not quieter nurses still bustled, machines still beeped, but reverent, especially outside one room, where a new bronze plaque now hung. The Argos Swite. For the dog who reminded us healing is more than science. No longer just room 7, not to anyone who had been there. Dr. Mercer ran a hand across the plaque. "We used to call this the overflow room," he said misty-eyed. Funny how a story can rewrite a place. Emily stood beside him, holding a worn leather journal filled with notes and photozone tucked in from earlier that day. Nathan on a bench. Finn asleep on his chest. Argos at their feet. "Stories change rooms," she whispered. That afternoon, Emily returned to the hospital library. She opened her laptop, took a breath, and began typing. Title: Presence. How a retired police dog taught us to listen. She typed the first line. Some guardians wear badges, others wear fur. It stayed. Each chapter would be a quiet testament. Threshold, vigil, synchrony, embrace, legacy. She knew some would call it unscientific, but the pilot study now cited in peer-reviewed abstracts disagreed. So did the presence therapy protocol now rolled out hospital-wide. Sentiment, Emily thought, was simply data with a pulse. Just then, Dr. Mercer appeared with 2 paper cups. "Decaf chai," he said, smiling. "Fuel that doesn't vibrate." Emily closed the journal and took the cup. "Trying to fit a miracle into paragraphs," she said. "Miracles aren't meant to fit," Mercer replied. "They stretch us." Outside, the light shifted. A breeze stirred. Somewhere, a child laughed, and they both imagined Argos's tail giving one solemn wag. "You think the board will keep the sweet name?" Emily asked. "They will," Mercer said. Matthews ordered the plaque himself. He also approved the inpatient presence initiative therapy dogs in PEDS, oncology, rehabol, modeled after Argos's profile. "Argos doesn't even know he's a pioneer," Emily smiled. "Maybe pioneers never do." Downstairs, a quiet dedication was held. No press, per milliampere Thu's request, just those who had lived it. The chaplain spoke softly. "May this space forever remind us that healing often walks on silent feet." Then Nathan stepped forward, Finn in his arms, and laid a single white rose beneath the plaque. No words, just a breath that trembled with gratitude, not grief. Argos lifted his gaze, past the plaque, past the hallway, towards something only he could see. Later that night, with the hospital hushed in sleep, Emily returned to her laptop and typed the final line. Some guardians wear badges, others wear fur, but all of them leave paw prints in floors, on hearts, in history's quiet reminders that presence might be the oldest medicine of all. She saved the file, closed the lid. Outside the suite now bearing his name, Argos curled on his mat, no longer in vigilance, but in peace. His work was not over. It never truly is. But tonight Legacy had found a home, and somewhere deep in the stillness, the hospital dreamed of quieter halls, gentler rhythms, and healing that walks on 4 silent paws. When all the machines grow quiet and the lights dim, what remains is the steady heartbeat of love, the kind that flows from a parent to a child, and from a devoted German shepherd to the people he's chosen as his own. Stories like Argos's remind us that loyalty isn't an abstract idea. It's a warm nose nudging a trembling hand, a silent vigil beside a hospital bed, a tail that thumps in time with a newborn's breath. If you've ever felt your dog lean into you after a long day, you already know how powerful that bond can be. Should you wish to deepen that connection, perhaps through simple activities that nurture trust and shared calm, I've tucked a gentle guide for fellow dog lovers in the video description. Feel free to look it over whenever the moment feels right. No pressure, just an open door. May you cherish every paw print on your heart, and may the quiet loyalty of dogs like Argos remind us that healing often begins with a soft nuzzle and a promise to stay.